On today's episode of Third Impact Anime, we teach you how to feel no shame about shape. Hello and welcome to another episode of Third Impact Anime Podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the 1997 television series Berserk, based on the manga by Kentaro Miura. I am your host today, Tobias, and I have a couple people here. Oh, sorry, let me put my glasses on right quick to see who we've got. Okay, it looks like we've got Austin joining us here on the podcast.
Hello, it is me, and I would like to take my Egg of the King on toast with cheese, please.
Okay, we'll get right on that. We've also got Ryan back on the podcast.
I'll take my Egg of the King scrambled.
And we've also got a bit of a special guest here. We've got returning champion, returning black swordsman, Will.
Hello, I will not be having an egg because I am branded for sacrifice.
Oh, so sorry to hear that.
That's very sad.
Thank you.
I can confirm, though, I have seen his car. It is, in fact, branded.
It's a Honda, right?
It's a Ford, so.
Oh, I was way off.
It's alright.
But yeah, the reason we've got this episode today is mostly Will's fault, honestly. He's been our resident Berserk appreciator for quite some time. And with Miura's unfortunate death back in 2021, I know this is something that he's particularly has wanted to do a podcast on. So after much delays which are well known to the Berserk community, we've actually sat down to do this. So, Will, why don't you go ahead and lead us off? What about Berserk has got you hooked?
Yeah, so I think for me, I got into Berserk very recent, I guess, in terms of my anime career. It was like not even a year into actually watching anime. I decided to just watch this wacky series called Berserk because it just looked cool. I really like fantasy stuff, so I was like, all right. And I think just the sheer quality of everything really blew me away. And it was also so much that it got me to actually read manga. So it's like the first manga that I read. I've been keeping up and following with the Berserk since, I want to say 2014, 2015. Very well adjusted to the hiatuses. So it was very easy for me to get into it and read at my own pace without falling too far behind.
Well, how did you... I have to wonder, how did you stumble upon Berserk as a franchise back in, 2014? Because I don't really know if there was much Berserk in the water of, anything hype coming out at that time. Did you just kind of find it by happenstance, or did somebody recommend it to you?
It was actually through Reddit. So I was someone who, when getting into anime, would just go to Reddit to look at, what's the best anime to watch.
They said Berserk?
Well, yeah, you'd have to go through a lot of the, classic stuff from back then. You gotta watch Full Metal Alchemist, you gotta watch Cowboy Bebop, a bunch of great shows and everything.
The usual
but then Berserk piqued my interest because, again, the setting, I really like this sort of, medieval fantasy setting. But also people said, oh, it's the top-rated manga on my anime list. And I didn't know what that was either, but I was like, okay.
What, manga or my anime list?
My anime list.
Okay.
What about your anime list?
Some people really cared about that back then.
Oh, I love list making and ranking, so back then I was all over it once I discovered it. And I went and watched it, and it changed my anime and manga trajectory for life.
Yeah, I would say 2014 was peak my anime list for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Mm-hmm.
What about you other guys? Austin, what was your introduction to Berserk?
Well, listeners may remember a number of years ago at this point, we had another fellow Ryan on the show. Not this Ryan, a different Ryan, who was a good friend of myself and Bill back in college. And he was the one that introduced me to the title Berserk for the first time back then. I don't think I had heard of it until he started talking about it. And then I looked into it and saw, it's this really big manga property that's really long and ongoing, and it's a big dark fantasy. And a lot of those things, to me at that time, I just wasn't really particularly interested in. I don't really know why. It's not like I don't like high fantasy and things like Lord of the Rings, etc.
Yeah.
But I guess it just didn't really strike me as something I wanted to get into.
And now you love Dark Souls.
Well, see, that's a really good point, because this was like literally months before the release of Bloodborne, which is the thing that got me into Souls games. You know, I had tried out Demon Souls on the PS3 and bounced off of it really, really hard. But it wasn't until Bloodborne came around, where it was this more like gothic, sort of Victorian action game style thing that piqued my aesthetic interests more than the medieval dark fantasy of Demon Souls, Dark Souls, etc. So it's funny you mentioned that, because this was like that same exact time. But anyway, back to Ryan. He had talked a big game about it, said the 90s series was really good, but he decided to introduce myself and Bill and the rest of our, roommate cohort at the time, the Merry Men, the Band of the Hawk, if you will, to the Studio 4C movie trilogy. So that was my first introduction to Berserk, was sitting down and watching that movie trilogy. And I distinctly remember at least number 2 and 3, I think we watched back to back on a snow day. And that's man, that was a rough day.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It took me a hot minute to get over that one.
I'm sure. But speaking of Ryans, let's go to the other Ryan, our Ryan. What was your introduction to Berserk?
Yeah, so back when I was dating Marissa, she sat me down one day and was like, hey, we're watching the Berserk movies. And I was like, okay, cool. And so I watched the first one with her, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I like this a lot. And then we watched the other two kind of spaced out over, I think, a couple of weeks, maybe like a month. And then by the time we got through the third movie, I was just like, I don't know how to feel at the moment. And so then...
Very normal reaction.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I sat on Berserk for a while after that. She started reading the manga, and then I think probably barely pre-COVID, I started reading it myself because Will was bullying me into it. And
that's a strong word.
I got about 200 or so chapters in before I took a break because something happened and I forgot to go back. You know how that happens.
Right, exactly.
And I picked it up again recently, and I think I have like 100 chapters to go at this point.
Oh, wow. I almost caught up.
Yeah. It is a really digestible manga because a lot of the chapters are mostly visual. So you can soak in the nice art into your eye holes and then just, plow through, because they're not super long all the time either. Like, a lot of the chapters are only like 13 pages, which is not that much.
Okay.
You say the manga's pretty digestible. I really wish that certain characters were not.
That's very true.
Too soon?
I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, I'm sure. Well, as for myself, I pretty much did everything but actually experience Berserk for a long time. Back when I was still a anime freshman, I was going to cons for my first time. One of the first things I discovered was AMVs, anime music videos, in particular comedic AMVs. Like if you guys have heard or remember AMV Hell, sort of just a quick shots of little one-off jokes with musical stingers with anime. And Berserk was a heavy influence in that scene. Even before knowing what it was, I'd already been introduced to Guts and Griffith and Casca, and already had kind of learned the in-game plot beats without actually knowing it. So before I knew the story, I kind of had an idea of what it was all about. So I'd actually sit down and read it. Like Ryan, I had a few years back, I had started reading the manga on some scan site at one point, but likewise just let it trail off for no reason. But this is the first time I've actually sat down and watched it, and it's been funny to see some of my expectations about this property that I'm aware of be met, but also sort of be reversed. And I'm very, very glad to sit down and talk about it and actually get this out of my system since, 2004?
There we
So
go.
were you shocked that it wasn't nearly as funny as the AMVs made it out to be?
Man, I gotta show you some of those original ones. I think you'll get a retroactive laugh out of some of the goofier ones. Okay, well, before we get into like, what are our thoughts, let's talk about what Berserk is. We've talked about our experience with it, but well, why don't you tell us like what this manga series is and who Miura is?
Yeah, for sure. So Berserk, the original manga, started publishing in 1989. I believe he did like a one-shot of Berserk, and then in 90 is when like the actual series started being produced. It comes out in a magazine that's now called Young Animal. At the time, it was called Monthly Animal House.
They got rid of the house. The animals are just running wild.
Oh, they're running loose,
We covered that in B-Stars.
They're old animals.
right? But yes, it is written and drawn by Kentaro Miura, who, as a lot of us already know, has sadly passed away back in 2021. At the time of his passing, he had made 364 chapters, or about 41 volumes, of Berserk. Since his passing, Berserk is actually still continuing. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But in terms of Miura Sensei himself, he essentially was started drawing as a child. He was very,
quickly before that, I do think it is.
Oh, of course.
It's notable to point out that like his passing really sent a massive ripple, not just through manga and anime fans, but through like the whole comics community globally. Because Berserk's influence sort of goes way, way beyond its specific manga niche. Like,
Right.
Notably, there was a big Berserk spread in the New York Times.
Yeah.
There was. I actually have that framed.
There was the memorial wall at, I think, San Diego also that year, wasn't it?
That sounds right.
I think so.
Yeah.
They had a huge exhibition in Japan as well, showing like different documents that he had and props that were like replicas of stuff in Berserk. Kind of like a museum you kind of walk through to see everything they had in Japan for, I want to say, a few weeks, including some like notes from different manga artists who knew him and everything. It was a very sweet exhibition. You can see pictures of it online.
And just to echo Austin's point, it's very easy to think of manga or anime even as a niche thing, but Miura's influence was so just like worldwide. People, even like Western artists, had drawn a lot of inspiration from Berserk, and in the same way that a lot of my experience with the series was sort of just these icons that are fed to me rather than experiencing the story. Just everything about this series is just so iconic, and it influenced so many people.
For sure. Miura is definitely kind of like the godfather of the dark fantasy genre. There's just so much that we wouldn't really have without his work.
Which is wild, honestly, because, like guarantee you, most anime fans have not watched this series, or read it for that matter. But, like, everyone is, like, aware of it, but not that many people have actually, like, consumed it.
I think that just shows its wide influence and appeal, because you have people who, like video games like Dark Souls, or even other big anime with big swords like Cloud from Final Fantasy VII.
Yep.
All these other different hobbies that kind of have links back to Berserk. So it just kind of adds on to that point of how ever permeating in media his influence is.
A lot of the people creating media experienced this back in 97 and before. So even if Berserk is not necessarily a powerhouse franchise now, again, the creators that grew up with it are now of the age to be making waves in their own, fields of influence. Is something that was important to them then, if not quite so much now.
For sure.
And, we talk about the circle of influences and the people that were influenced by Miura. He himself was inspired by a lot of other sources as well. Isn't that right?
He really was, especially early on. He was an apprentice for George Morikawa, better known for Hajime no Ippo, Fist of the North Star, Baronasan. So he kind of had a lot of that influence there. He also had a lot of other influence from other mangaka from the time, so things like, or individuals rather, like Go Nagai, Ishinomori. He also got a lot of influence from shoujo series too, like Aim of the Ace and Rose of Versailles. So a lot of those other earlier works influenced him. but also more than just like his contemporaries, but also a lot of influences he grabs from the Western side of the world. He's been quoted to kind of jump around a lot in terms of what's influencing him. Things from like RoboCop, Mad Max, Evil Dead, and Hellraiser. It seems like every time he would give an interview, he would talk about all this media he's constantly consuming and how that is influencing elements he's putting into Berserk. So I think it's really interesting that not only is he taking more of like the traditional type of influences from like where he is, but also looking at what's also popular all around the world, especially in Western media too, that kind of add on to it.
So what I'm hearing is that the last 100 or so chapters of Berserk have a lot of idol masters in it, right?
Well, I don't know about that. There are definitely a lot of I will say there are certain sections that do have a lot of idol type characters. I'll just leave it at that. So maybe a little nod, because he was not as much of the idol master fan as people kind of led to believe.
Oh, okay.
It is kind of funny looking at Berserk, because it basically, like, if you boil it down to its base elements, it's basically like, well, what if it was Evil Dead, where like there was a bunch of demons chasing after this one guy, and like ruining his life, but just made like into prestige manga, you know, taking all these influences from shoujo, which is highly melodramatic, as Berserk is, where everybody's constantly like wearing their emotions on their sleeves and things like that, and you know, taking all the body horror from Go Nagai stuff and Tezuka stuff like Dororo and things like that. So like anytime I've skimmed through an interview and sort of read those name drops, like you said, Will, almost every time I could put the puzzle pieces together pretty quickly to be like, oh, I know exactly what he pulled from Evil Dead to put into this, or I know exactly what he pulled from like Rose of Versailles, because Griffith even kind of has the same exact silhouette, you know, as like Band of the Hawk Griffith as Lady Oscar from Rose of Versailles. They have like the same exact haircut. Like
also one of the God Hand like definitely looks like something out of Hellraiser.
Totally.
Oh,
and
yeah.
like the main God Hand, I think this was, well, I don't know if this was right around the same time, but the main Godhead looks a lot like those things from Mars Attacks. Tim Burton movie.
Oh my God, it does.
Void, he does look like that.
I would very much hazard a guess that he was not taking influence from Mars Attacks, however.
Well,
I mean, with everything he's reaching and taking things in, I can definitely see him maybe watching that wacky Tim Burton Western movie.
Yeah.
but even the original, weren't they original just like illustrations, right? Or postcards that had the Martians on them? I think they were like
Something
bubblegum,
like that, yeah.
little bubblegum cards that had.
Yeah, that's
Like,
right.
it wasn't a story; it was just like art. I
Yeah.
I
Kind of like Garbage Pail Kids kind of thing.
Exactly. Well, I definitely saw the Bronson influence. Like when we get into the
Totally.
meat of the series and Guts, you know, training with the band and getting beefy and swinging the sword around, he looks just like straight out of Fist of the North Star. You can absolutely see that influence there.
I mean, Guts even looks like
Kenshiro?
his name was escaping me. Thanks.
Yeah. Mr. North Star. It is pretty neat that he both worked for Beronson for a while and then with Beronson on a couple like one-off manga projects. I don't know. Will, are you familiar with any of those?
I am personally am not, unfortunately. A lot of those like earlier works I have not delved into too much. Like I kind of said before, like Berserk was the manga that like got me into reading manga, and despite reading that and having the hiatuses, of course, there aren't too many other mangas of that era and before I have really explored, which I really should, seeing the wide range that goes into Berserk.
Indeed.
Please, Mr. North Star as my father. Call me Fist of.
Guts would absolutely say you were already dead.
Oh yeah, he absolutely would.
Bong! Hits him with a big
Chop
sword.
shit. go ahead sort of get in the meat and potatoes of the 1997 adaptation by Studio OLM. Let's go ahead and kick this off with our voice cast. Austin, would you like to do the honors?
Sure, I'd love to talk about some voice casts. So, as our lead character, Guts, he is played by Nobutoshi Hayashi, who a lot of people might recognize as the voice of Basara Neki in Macross 7. And if you don't know who Basara Neki is in Macross 7, he is the guy who, in the GIF, eats the leaf. You guys know what I'm talking about? You know, the leaf, the anime guy who, like, the leaf falls on his face and he grabs it and eats it.
Oh. Yeah, I know that.
That's
he's the one with the guitar, right?
Yes, he's the main character of Macross 7. So, Macross, we've discussed this on the podcast before, but, like, it's kind of a franchise that a lot of people in the West aren't super familiar with, especially those later mid entries. But, yeah, that meme is pretty iconic in its own right, and Hayashi voices him. He also voices Lancer in Fate Stay Night, the original Lancer. I mean, I know there's, like, a trillion Lancers, but he's, like, the one in the anime and the one that has shown up that's really popular. I can't remember his real name, but if y'all Fate Stay Night sickos, you know who I'm talking about. And
Yeah.
probably the most fun credit against Guts is that he's the longtime voice of Knuckles in Sonic the Hedgehog.
Nice.
All right.
That's funny.
I can't think I've experienced too many Japanese dubs of Sonic stuff, but interesting.
Then as Griffith, we have Toshiyuki Morikawa, who has really run the gamut of playing Capcom cool guys. So he is Dante in Devil May Cry since, I believe, Devil May Cry 4. I don't know if he plays him in the original trilogy. I didn't see a credit for that. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. He also plays Ryu in Street Fighter, I believe, since like Street Fighter 4, since like the HD era of Street Fighter. And he also plays Leon Kennedy since Resident Evil 4, which is pretty relevant because the Resident Evil 4 remake just came out. And it's also relevant because of a certain YouTuber that is on this episode right now. Do you want to go ahead and plug your project you just did?
Sure. So I do have my YouTube channel, SwooshXBear, where I do make YouTube videos on video games, and I did finish my review of Resident Evil 4 just in time for the Resident Evil 4 remake. By the time you're listening to this, I will be playing that game.
Thank you for that brief ad.
Thanks.
Okay, well, let's make that ad a little less brief, because I got to ask you, where did SwooshXBear come from? Please tell me.
Time.
I actually answered this in my Q&A episode that's on my YouTube channel, too. So you can check that out. But the short answer is...
No, wait, hold on. Should we not just tell Tobias he has to go watch the episode to find out?
Yeah, that could be it, too. I do go in great depth about that.
Yeah, we could do that for sure. I do have... I was behind on YouTube in general. I've just recently discovered the Watch Later feature. So rather than telling myself I'm going to watch it and never do, I've been making sure to tag things for Watch It Later. And, some of your videos made it there. And I did, in fairness, I did watch your RE4 video, well, the first third of it, yesterday. Because eventually I'm going to play the game. Maybe the remake, maybe the original. And you got to, after the Ashley part, no, I don't think I want to spoil myself. But
Very
Me
fair.
too. Same hat.
I did give you a like. I need to comment. I need to give you the snark comment like I usually do. But I watched as much as I could. I'll put it that way.
Well, thanks. Now you can... I'll be hand in hand with you as you're playing through the remake.
You need to do an hour-by-hour walkthrough of this. Like a podcast where I just put one headphone in my ear and listen to you in your dulcet tones talk about Resident Evil 4 and the Chainsaw Man.
There we go.
Chainsaw Man.
Yeah, Chainsaw Man's in there, man. You didn't know that?
Spoils.
That's where they got the inspiration. But enough of this tangent. Thank God Bill's not here. Who else do we have on this cast?
Yes, of course. So Morikawa also, you would probably know him as being Sephiroth since Advent Children, and one of my favorite JoJo's Bizarre Adventure characters, Yoshikage Kira in Diamond is Unbreakable. But this guy has voiced hundreds of roles throughout his career, so if I didn't list your favorite one, well, the Anime News Network Encyclopedia did it for me. You could just go read that. Another one that's really fun for this podcast is the voice of Casca is voiced by Yuko Miyamura, who, again, is another Street Fighter alum. She is the current voice of Chun-Li and has been for a number of years. She also plays the Lurkseen in Kingdom Hearts. And most notably for us, she is Asuka in Neon Genesis Evangelion, still to this day.
There it is.
Asuka and Asuka.
Good one.
Please laugh.
And please. And for Bill's sake, I do want to note that she also plays Kazuya Toyama in Detective Conan.
Man, so we've already got a Bloodborne reference, we've got a kind of Conan reference, we got a Resident Evil reference just for Will. We're checking off all the things.
Berserk is so great.
So many tendrils. We're about to make the Pokemon fans really happy too.
That's true.
Yeah, Ryan, do you want to talk about the English voice cast as well?
Yeah, I can pronounce these. So first we're starting off with, you gotta be kidding me. That's like a complicated one, starting right off the bat. Okay, so you got Mark Derison.
Mark?
Yeah. No, Derison. I look at it and I'm like, oh, that's not like Smith. Okay, so we got Mark Derison as Guts. He's also Zoro in the One Piece 4Kids dub, and Tokiomi Tosaka in Fate Zero, and he does a fantastic job, I thought.
The best Fate show, by the way.
Yes, it is.
Really
easily.
the only one you need to watch.
I like Unlimited Blade Works.
It's all right.
I mean,
Yeah.
really the best Fate thing to experience is none of it, but I'll let you
Honestly.
continue.
Well, I think the best Fate thing to experience is the Fate Zero episode that we did.
That's true.
Oh,
We got all the plugs in this episode. So, moving on, we got Kevin Collins as Griffith. He was Akito Tagaki in Bakuman, as well as various roles in Gundam Seed. And given that it's a Gundam show, I assume he just had a role in like every episode doing some background character.
Mm-hmm.
more than likely, I think this was a Canadian dub, and I'm not sure. I know the Ocean Studios in Canada did most of like the early to mid aughts Gundam dubs. I'm not sure if this dub was made in Canada, but I'm sure he was probably.
I mean,
involved.
Google Kevin Collins and see if he's Canadian, because Canada, I've learned, media really likes to stick to like Canadians for the most part.
I'm going to continue to live in ignorance.
Sounds good. Also, it's notable for Griffith. Veronica Taylor plays young Griffith, and she is known for being Ash Ketchum in the first 8 seasons of Pokemon. So we all grew up listening to her voice.
You gotta catch all the God Hand.
Yeah, right.
Who's that guy?
Catch them all.
It's Griffith.
Demon. We haven't gotten that far yet in the show, honestly, though. Also, Carrie Karanen is Casca, and she was Maya Hisao in Fate Zero and Satsuki in Kill la Kill, and Misato in, again, Evangelion, but the Netflix dub.
She not only was she the dub voice of Misato for the Netflix dub, she was the ADR director as well. Carrie, she probably, with the exception of somebody who comes up a little bit later in this list, she's probably the one that has the longest legacy out of this dub cast, because I consistently see her working and doing things in the industry pretty often. Like she's a regular in modern dubs, like frequently.
Gotcha. Well, the person that jumps out for me, we'll get to them in a minute, but Rachel Lillis was Princess Charlotte, and she is known for being Misty in Pokemon, and not just Princess Charlotte. I don't remember what episode it was. I think it was just one of the random war episodes. There were definitely a few background characters she did, because I just straight up heard Misty, like unabridged Misty, saying something, and I had to like roll it back, and I was like, that was definitely the snarkiness that Misty had in Pokemon.
It's one of those dub voices that you don't have to look it up. You just know that's Misty.
Yeah. But like I was saying, also, the person that stuck out to me the most was Sean Shamel as Gaston, who is Guts' second in command of the Raiders. He is really well known for being adult Goku in the Funimation dub of Dragon Ball, like the entire franchise.
Still working as Goku to this day.
Yeah, he is, isn't he?
Imagine Goku is second in command of the Raiders. It just shows how strong Guts is.
So true.
Then rounding it out, we got Mike Pollock as Adon Koro. I can't pronounce that one.
It's Koborowitz.
Yeah. And He's known for being Eggman in the Sonic franchise ever since 2003.
He's been voicing Eggman as a family tradition that's been passed down for Korowitz generations.
Good one.
The ancient Eggman technique.
I'm the person, like, it's well known that I'm the person who prefers watching dubs because I have substantial ADHD, so I have to be doing something with my hands at the same time that I'm watching something. And I was fully prepared just to watch a show with a laughable 90s dub, and it was actually, like, fantastic.
As a show as, like, dark at times as Berserk, I personally also really like this dub because it has a lot of lighthearted moments in it. Just like the way some characters talk, or like the mutterings of some of the like background Band of the Hawk members, like during certain scenes. Like there's a lot of good lighthearted moments with this cast and the show.
This dub to me, which I also watched because I'm, of course, resident dub liker. I went into this expecting it to be kind of shaky because that is the only thing that I've heard about this 90s Berserk dub, is that it's like very much of its time. But I'm also the type of person that thinks the 90s dub of Evangelion is quite good despite its flaws. And I walked away basically feeling the same way about this dub that I felt about the Eva dub, where it's just like certain characters and certain actors really nail it, even if the whole thing doesn't necessarily come together. But I'll say specifically the Mike Pollock as a Don. Horrible guy, just totally unlikable scumbag, but his performance makes it completely watchable. Very, very, very funny to watch this guy.
Oh, yeah. It definitely does have its moments, though, like, especially with, like, the side characters. Like, the episode where Guts is fighting the, like, thousands of soldiers, or however many it was. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Of course.
You just hear, like, some of the people giving, like, a very light performance, like, get him! And they like, don't really put their all into it. They just kind of, like, definitely walked in the booth, recorded the line, dropped the mic, and walked out. But, like, that's again what I expected for the time. Like, I expected so much worse because, yeah, 90s dubs sometimes are, like, laughable. But, yeah, like you said, I liked this as much as I liked the Evangelion dub.
Now, if you do want to laugh along with this dub, very famously, there are a bunch of outtakes that the dub voice actors did. I believe it was on the DVD release that had it on there, but you can see them on YouTube, where it's just the voice actors just having a really fun time.
My love for you is like a truck has lived rent-free in my brain since I heard it.
Did they do the thing on the DVD where they take the outtakes and, like, animate them?
Yes.
Yeah,
Nice.
there's animation with it. I've only watched it from YouTube because I am unfortunate enough to not own this physically.
the
Maybe
box
one
of
day.
war.
I need that box of war.
How unobtainable is this set?
It's expensive.
Pretty unobtainable.
Okay.
It's unobtainable unless you have the money for it.
Well, that's pretty much anything.
So, for
And
me,
it's also-
unobtainable.
It's also difficult. I mean, this might just be a me thing, but, well, I guess a broader context here. The show was licensed by Media Blasters in the early 2000s, and it was put out on DVD, relatively good DVDs. It was, of the time, DVD release in like 5 or 6 individuals. Then they released a compilation complete box set later on. But since then, after Media Blasters lost the rights, it's been lost. Like, the license has never been renewed, never by anyone. Media Blasters, I think, even came out and said a few years ago publicly that they said they don't even have the rights anymore. Because it seems like a lot of the stuff that they put out, back at that time period, they do still have the rights for, but this is not one of those things. So it's not been available officially in the U.S. for probably going on 15 years. So those DVDs are pretty expensive.
Yeah, that's why we all got really excited when like the streaming rights was announced, but then sadly found out, this does not include us.
That's right.
There's also a Blu-ray set. It's
pretty
I don't
unfortunate.
think we've got that either, and it's kind of weird that nobody bothered to pick that up. You think like Discotech, get on that? That would be a slam dunk win.
Yeah. I feel like if they got this, it would be like an evergreen title for them, but I don't know. Licensing can be weird. It just might not be available for international disc license. I don't know. The streaming thing, even if it's not in the U.S. territory, is a good sign that it can eventually be rescued, but only time will tell.
If you have NordVPN, you can watch it anytime. But
or if you fly to Japan like we did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Nice country. But I just hate lost media because it just seems like such a waste, especially... Spoiler alert, I really liked the show. Like, the fact that it's unavailable is awful. Like, other people are not able to watch this because, most people don't have the money to fly to Japan. And they're missing out on, like, an actually quality 90s anime.
Yeah, like, from my experience, like, I watched, the Blu-ray, and it looked great. The ones that I watched looked really great. Yeah, sure, it shows its time. Sure, it shows its age, I should say. But it's so wild that no one has picked this up for U.S. release at all.
I think the other thing, too, is, like, and something we heard a couple people say already, is that y'all's first introduction was by watching the Golden Age movies, which is kind of divided in the fandom in terms of how much they like them or not. So, like, even people who like Berserk already are familiar with it don't get to see what I would say is the best animation adaptation of it.
Well, I know that at the time when the TV series was coming out in 2016 or so, I know Crunchyroll was pushing that pretty heavily, but I wonder if just maybe because that the 3D CG era just didn't take off, maybe because Crunchyroll was throwing a lot of money at a lot of things at that time. I wonder if that has something to do with it, honestly.
I'm now crafting a possible theory. So,
all right.
Not to derail the conversation too far, but I was thinking, there was this idea whenever the Evangelion rebuilds were coming out in earnest, before really 4.0 had a release window, that Studio Kara really wanted to focus just on making sure that the licensing rights internationally for the rebuilds were the thing that was prioritized. So that's probably why we didn't see a Blu-ray release internationally of the original TV show for a good number of years. It was only been in the last, 2 that the original NGE came out over here. Maybe this is a similar situation. I mean, we see this right now with the Star Blazers and Yamato sort of releases, where we've got very easy access to the new Yamato, but the old stuff is just gone. So maybe the rights holders are just like, well, we've got the Studio 4C show, or excuse me, we've got the Studio 4C movies, which is basically the same thing. We'll just focus on that and not really worry about the 90s thing, because it's the same content, right? I mean, obviously, Sicko fans would have vehement disagreements about that, because we want it all.
Want to do that again?
Yeah. Obviously, Sicko fans would disagree with that idea, because we want it all, of course. But I could imagine them operating on that sort of train of thought.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned producers and rights holders, because that's the next thing I want to talk about is the production of this show. So the series was produced, the co-production was Nippon TV and a company called VAP, short for Video and Audio Project. If you guys watch the opening credits every time like I did to hear that amazing, great song by the Pen Pals, you probably saw the...
Tell me why. Tell me why.
Well, I watched it because I liked the song, Austin. I was getting there. You probably saw the logo for it had like a little zero, like a pixelated zero, and just VAP show up at the end of it. And these are not companies. Well, I've heard of Nippon TV, of course, but not VAP. So Nippon TV is the broadcaster, of course. That's where Berserk originally aired. A very popular television channel in Nippon. But VAP is sort of like a general rights holder. They have a music label where they've got a whole bunch of musical artists signed. They end up producing a lot of the physical sets for their anime. So, like, they hold the rights for Akagi and Kaiji, those 2 gambling series. Death Note, actually. The 2011 Hunter x Hunter series. My personal favorite, Kaiba. And Urasawa's Monster. And lastly, to go ahead and do our checkbox here for Sully's appearance on the episode, they also own the rights for the Super Mario Brothers movie, The Great Mission to Rescue Princess Peach.
Nice.
Check out our episode on that, too.
True. Talk about a missed opportunity to get a pristine either streaming release or Blu-ray release of that OVA in order to hype up the movie that's coming out in just a few weeks. It's such a shame. Why aren't we in charge of these companies?
Well, we don't have a lot of money.
That we don't.
They can give it to me.
Speaking of giving us money, we have a Patreon. Go ahead and have a link in the show notes for that and plug it at the end if you have some extra money you want to burn.
If you're listening along at home, the shameless plug counter is up to 6.
Please donate so we can all collectively share one box of war.
No, VAP just has, they just hold a bunch of rights for the stuff and they produce some of it. If you look at the production committee model, this is pretty common. You have people like the broadcaster, people that produce the merchandise, of course. But this is not a name that I hear very often, so it was surprising to me to see stuff like Death Note, like Kaiba, like The Great Mission to Rescue Princess Peach on the repertoire. So I wonder if that's something to do with it with regards to an English release. We've seen this other stuff has come over. Wonder why Berserk's not on that list.
Most of it, in fact.
Okay, as far as the anime itself, this was animated by Studio OLM, Oriental Light and Magic. Now, I mentioned this in panels that I've done before, because the joke is that OLM is also the studio that has made Pokemon since the very beginning. It's kind of a funny thing to say OLM go from the gotta catch 'em all craze to Berserk, which, you're catching something, all right. Which, for a while was a joke I gave, but there's a lot more connections than I thought. We already mentioned some of the English voice connections, but in particular, OLM being a big studio that animates big properties like Pokemon, like some Pretty Cure, like a lot of children's shows. They have a bunch of individual studios. So Berserk was animated by OLM Iguchi, named after the lead producer Noriaki Iguchi, as, again, was the style at OLM. They sort of named their teams after their production manager, lead producer. And he, of course, Iguchi is credited here as the production manager. But OLM Iguchi also animated Comic Party, one of the Two Heart series, the 2006 adaptation of Disgaea, that Atlas SRPG, and they would go ahead and animate Pokemon from the 2006 to 2009, and then they would disband, be reformed as OLM Kato, who is still working on Pokemon. So while it's funny to think of this studio as the Pokemon studio, they are in fact still the people working on that series. But as far as individuals here,
I'm pretty sure not that this matters, and not that I endorse well actualing you, but I'm pretty sure, not that I know anything about this franchise, Disgaea is an NIS thing, not an Atlas thing. I don't know.
Correct.
You video game sickos know more than I do.
I think you're right.
Sounds
maybe
about right.
Yeah, you are correct
okay.
about that.
I thought, wasn't there a lot of distribution versus creation thing with that? Or am I just completely off model?
Okay, actually, what you're thinking of probably is Atlas actually did publish Disgaea in the States.
Oh, well, see, I guess I'm wrong.
That's
then.
sort of like mishmash of hyper anime strategy RPGs of the time. Yeah. That's all blended to me. Yeah. A whole bunch of that all kind of comes together as one big blob in my mind. I knew Disgaea was a popular one in particular.
Well, Atlas did, in fact, publish Demon Souls on the PS3 back in the day, which is, of course, highly influenced by Berserk. So, that's a reason to bring it up, right? We're trying to turn this segue into something meaningful,
yeah.
Right?
When I think of Disgaea and the Atlas formula, Persona, I certainly think of Demon Souls. Same game, really, if you think about it.
Same game, if you think about it. Yeah.
All right. Well, as far as individual people worked on this series, the director is now Hito Takahashi, who's been an OLM veteran for a while. He would go on to also direct Steel Angel Kurumi for those fellow mid-aught sickos that were watching ADV Demo Disc. You might have watched an episode of Steel Angel Kurumi. I don't know anyone that actually likes this show. Correct me in the comments. Another one of the Two Heart adaptations he directed, and more recently, he did some of the Yokai Watch movies. So we talk about OLM being a factory to pump out kids franchises. There you go, it's Yokai Watch. But I think the pinnacle of his output was the Agatha Christie anime adaptation, Agatha Christie no Meitante Poro Tomarple in 2004, where they do in fact capture Mewtwo in that one, I believe.
Well, good for them.
Thanks.
Another thing about
What can't Poirot do?
Another thing about Takahashi is he's also went by a pen name. I wasn't able to find a whole lot of information about why he did this. His pen name is Ryunosuke Otanashi, and most of this was more chief animation, key animator type stuff. So maybe this sort of a way to shunt off some of that extra work rather than put it all in one name for directorial work. But as Otanashi, he was the chief animation director on Iria's Rhyme, the animation, speaking of recent discotheque pickups, and also the Rumiko Takahashi classic Maizani Koku.
Another long-running, popular in its time when it came out over here, anime that is not available modernly on streaming or on DVD.
I don't think I could get away from this without mentioning the music, and this is by Suzumu Hirasawa. For those longtime listeners, might remember we just mentioned Hirasawa on our Paranoia Agent episode a few months back.
True.
They have a very distinctive style, not only with Paranoia Agent, they did a bunch of Satoshi Kon soundtracks, including Paprika, I think the initial cut for Dreaming Machine, and they've mentioned coming to do the Opus adaptation. So Maruyama has often talked about wanting to do Opus. I don't think it's ever going to actually happen, but Hirasawa has said, I'm on board, just let me know, I'll be there.
And you can actually listen to his work on Berserk on Spotify now. It actually came to Spotify, I think, sometime this year or the end of last year.
Oh, that's great.
So when you want to have those moody drives to the Guts' theme, you now can.
Anything Hirasawa ever works on is typically quite notable because of the fact that, well, A, his musical styling is super unique, and B, he doesn't really work on anime all that often. Like you said, this is basically the extent of his involvement. Like he worked on a bunch of Satoshi Kon projects and Berserk, and he did come back for the Golden Age trilogy,
right.
At least. I don't know if he did the 2016-17 adaptations. Maybe he contributed some tracks, I'm not sure, but he did come back for that, which is pretty notable because of how infrequently he works on anime properties.
I want to say that he did, or they at least sampled some of his songs from earlier Berserk for that, but I'm not 100% on that one. But even in interviews, Miura has talked about how much he's enjoyed his work, before even working on the anime.
Oh, absolutely.
And that might be why, too, because, I mean, he was an independent artist, before, of course, it's his, primary job. And I think that's how Satoshi Kon got with him as well. It's just that Kon was a big fan of his work and just asked him. Miura was probably the same way.
Yeah, it's very surreal, electronic, just basis that works so well. It's such a big part of Paranoia Agent. And I'm going to lie, when I went into this, I did not expect the music to really be anything. It's not generally... I don't expect music and anime TV series to be great. So when they are, such as here, it kind of blew me away. And that's what kept me watching, I think, in a lot of ways.
Totally.
There were 3 tracks that kept recurring that by the end of it, I definitely was oh, you're back. But they were really good. And the funny thing actually is I was watching a random TikTok the other day, and I just heard an earworm kind of faded into the background. The guy was using one of the Berserk tracks, and I just commented, I'm I appreciate the use of the Berserk music, and he replied back and he's I did not think anybody would catch that.
Yeah, you mentioned that. It was very repetitive, admittedly, but man, it was the best kind of repetitive every time.
That was kind of the flavor of the time, though. They would use a few tracks over and over again, and each one of them had a different emotion that it was trying to represent.
Absolutely.
Or thematically too. Anytime you hear Guts' theme, it's one of the pinnacle scenes in the show.
Right, we want to talk about the opening and ending as well. I don't really know so much about it other than the lyrics for both are unintentionally comical.
I don't either. I just really like the opening because I think it's short, sweet, simple, has a great track, and it's fun. It's just a fun opening.
The constant conversation whenever it comes to the opening of Berserk is that upon initial impression, when you see that this is the opening for this series, it's a lot of tonal dissonance because it's this 90s rock song that sounds like it should be like a cut song from Fooly Cooly or something like that. not really something you would think would be the opening for this medieval dark fantasy kind of thing. But I will say it did grow on me after a while. I admit to having made fun of it previously in past years, but it's really grown on me. It's quite a bop. It's an earworm. The poorly delivered English lyrics are very charming, and I'm down for it.
Yep.
If I may add, when I first watched this show, thanks to some wonderful individual on Reddit, they recommended that you just watch the 97 anime starting on episode 2. And the reason they say that is because that's just right where the Golden Age aspect starts, so you don't see any of the Black Swordsman's art or arc originally. So if you do that, and then you watch that opening, it's like, okay, it's a cool man with sword. That's nice. You don't see any of, like, the fantasy supernatural type stuff until much later on when you first meet Zod. And that episode is one of my favorites because I remember the first time watching that and being honestly blown away because I was not expecting it to be anything like fantasy-esque. I thought it was just going to be like strictly medieval kind of stuff.
Realism.
I think a lot of the pacing for Berserk is really interesting because it really does start with, that Guts is trying to find Griffith because he did something bad. And then you see the rest of the show is just the like Golden Age flashback to how he got there. So the viewer already has that knowledge but is trying to find out the why. But if you look at it from the other angle and then you just don't know, you have more of kind of a shock to that.
Well, the Golden Age trilogy by 4C, they kind of do take a hard line on that perspective where you don't get thrown in media res into sort of the Black Swordsman stuff. It just starts off with Golden Age material.
Part of me thinks that's kind of better for a modern audience, but I used to prefer that method, but now I'm not so sure if I do.
Well, let's go ahead and finish up production before we break down that, because I feel like I got some thoughts on that too. Going to be a big point of contention, I believe. But wrapping up the production here, I do want a couple more shout outs. The character design was by 2 people here. Of course, Miura naturally created the characters, but for the anime adaptation, we have Norihiro Matsubara, who has worked on character design all throughout the Pokemon series, as well as the Gunsmith Cats anime adaptation, and is also the chief animation director for this series. And we also have character designs...
Wow, wear 2 hats here.
And we also have character designs by Yoshihiko Umakoshi, who's done a ton of kids' works. We have a whole bunch of Precure. Like, I started to type out, it was like Precure All-Stars, the movies. Oh, it was Heart Catch Pretty Cure. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put Precure here. He's done a lot of Pretty Cure. It's, again, this is a great comparison to the content of Berserk. Also worked on Oramajo Doremi, very similar to Precure. Mushishi, very not similar to Precure. And even more recently, My Hero Academia. So this guy's still getting work.
I was reflecting just the other day about, how there's basically a new Pretty Cure series almost every year, if not every year since it started in like 2004. And I'm pretty sure, last I checked, the amount of Pretty Cure episodes is like just a few hundred away from the amount of One Piece episodes, which really does put things into perspective.
That's what's kind of fascinating about OLM. They do stuff like Pokemon that has been ongoing since, 98 or so, when the original series came out. It's not just a matter of putting out a season of one work, but you have to be a factory, continue to pump out these works for your young audience. And lastly, let's shout out the art director here. So this was Shinichiro Kobayashi.
Yeah, so unfortunately Kobayashi is no longer with us. He passed away kind of late in the fall of last year. And he was an older guy. He had been in the animation industry for a long time. But his major claim to fame was his art direction, specifically like his background art. And it's something that if you recognize one of his pieces and you put together the connections to other things, it kind of becomes instantly recognizable. He has these beautiful sort of like pastel color landscapes that he does. You'd probably most recognize him for something like Lupin III and the Castle of Cagliostro, but he also did a ton of other things that really play with different visual styles because Cagliostro is, fairly we've got these castles, we've got these lush floral scenes, and you see those in Berserk as well. These castles, these floral things, the greenery and all this stuff. But he also did things like Angel's Egg and Urusei Yatsura, Beautiful Dreamer, and Venus Wars. And he also did other shoujo works, including the Aim for the Ace movie and Revolutionary Girl Utena. So he has this just like amazing breadth and width of talent that is really shown, I think, in full force throughout Berserk, because we see these castles, we see these beautiful skyscapes, we see these like horrifying images during the eclipse, and he's a legend, a total legend. Anything that he ever did was just incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I can see exactly what you mean. Even watching so much of this, I figured it was going to be more of a Conan sort of adventure story with a big buff dude killing other dudes. But even just seeing like the castles and the forest in the background and the way he laid out, the geography and the way he depicted the battles, just I think it worked really, really well. And I could see, you mentioned these other things, how that would connect for sure.
One thing that stood out to me was the significant sort of anime language pulled from the productions of Osamu Dezaki, because throughout Berserk, and because of Kobayashi's involvement, he worked with Dezaki on other things, so there's certainly a lot of like literal actual experience here, but there's a ton of postcard memories in Berserk. A ton of those like 3-frame like emphasis shots, like whenever Guts hits something cool with his sword, and just a lot of those sort of over the top anime language things that came out of a lot of Dezaki's tricks, like his bag of tricks. And Berserk is just full of that stuff all the time.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a quick break then, and we'll be back to discuss our thoughts on Berserk. We're back, so I do want to go ahead and open the discussion here. Just go ahead and riff off what we were talking earlier about the introduction. So, when I started reading the manga, like I mentioned a few years back, and it has a very interesting first panel. Let me put it that way. And I do remember, as much as I read, which probably wasn't that much in retrospect, it is just the Black Swordsman arc. We see him pal around with some people, but we don't actually see what I now know is the Golden Age. So when I sat down to watch this series, it does that in the very first episode. It sort of hooks you into this idea that bad stuff has gone down, there is a broken world, and you can see immediately how the Castlevania series completely stole its entire intro from Berserk as well. As the first scene is just completely shot for shot almost.
Is it actually shot for shot?
I don't think it was shot for shot, but the whole time I watched Castlevania back in 2016, 17, I thought Berserk already did this. I've seen this already.
The people who made Castlevania, they are very open about not only their taking inspiration from Berserk, but have said in multiple interviews that they would love to do any adaptation they could do. They're huge fans of it. So I totally
that's only the first episode. So we see the intro. We get introduced to Guts as a person. We get introduced to his big honking sword. We get introduced to the idea of there being Griffith. And immediately it flashbacks into his past. And I was thinking going into this, okay, surely they're going to give us maybe 10 episodes of the Golden Age before we cut back to the bad times. I was a little surprised that we went the entire season just doing Golden Age stuff, and the fact that it ended with, stuff going down at the end. So, what do we think about that? Do we think that it worked in that sense, or not?
I mean, Golden Age is a very good arc, but it's also a very long arc. So I thought we were going to get the Black Swordsman arc in its entirety in the first 3 episodes, because it doesn't really take that long. It's a very short, sweet, to the point arc, but apparently not. I think probably what they intended to do initially was tease us and then finish Golden Age and then do the Black Swordsman arc and then continue from there. But I was going to talk about this a little later, but the manga was not really that far ahead of where the anime ended.
Yeah, I'd heard that too. So
they didn't really have a lot to go off of, even when they created the show. When the show started, Golden Age had finished maybe 4 chapters ago, and then by the time the anime ended, one of Guts's main party members of the series going forward hadn't even been introduced yet.
And we have to remember too, the anime may have come out then, but production probably started a year before that.
Correct.
So there was even less material.
Yeah, I really do wonder if when they had the cliffhanger, I really wonder if they were just this is all we have right now. So
a lot of it really is. Even from the manga perspective, Black Swordsman arc is, I want to say, the first 3 volumes of the manga, and then Golden Age happens, and Golden Age concludes at volume 13.
It's a lot.
And right now there are 41 published volumes of Berserk, so we're not even a third into the entirety of it, and such a small portion of it is this kind of Golden Age, the beauty of it, before it gets to what Berserk is mostly known for, being a lot of the dark bad times.
Yeah, because
so even though there's a lot of violence and everything in this, a lot of the horrors of the universe here, we don't really see that much. We see terrible stuff, don't get me wrong, but a lot of it is kind of that first episode. That's what the world is mostly like in Berserk.
Yeah, eventually the wars pivot from being soldiers versus soldiers to the remnants of nations against demonic beasts. Right. So the show, the series really, just kind of entirely changes after Golden Age. It is not remotely the same series.
Exactly.
To kind of go back to Tobias's initial question, does this work? I think it's a really tough thing to really give a hard answer on for me personally, because I think what we have in this single 90s series of Berserk, which was all we had for a long, long time, I think at the end of the day it kind of doesn't work, because it's ultimately quite unsatisfying from most perspectives. But at the same time, I don't know if a more truncated Golden Age arc existing alongside a truncated Black Swordsman arc within the same 25 episodes would have been any better. In fact, I think that probably would have been worse, because they would have had to cut out a lot more content to be able to fit both stories into 25 episodes. So I think from an adaptation of the Golden Age arc, at least from what I know about it, from the source material, which is admittedly not much, it does work in that regard. But from an overall artistic entertainment perspective, it's just it's really unsatisfying, whenever all is said and done, because it's just you walk away from the end of it and you're just oh, well, okay, what was the point of that?
Yeah, I think a big part of it too is you only really have one episode to set that tone, and you don't really revisit. Part of me is what if they just start with Golden Age, and then that one episode they actually fully show Guts, spoilers, Guts getting out of the eclipse, because the anime is very, it just kind of ends without really showing how
Yeah.
Guts and all that gets resolved. And I'm like, if we just had one more episode just to kind of help bridge that gap and show where Guts is going next, I think that would make it a lot more cohesive.
I agree.
And like that content, I'm sure was like, you know, time frames, but I'm sure that content was like either being written or like was about to happen at the time. I read a couple places that Miura was like a supervisor on this show, so I'm sure any sort of input he gave could have maybe helped on that, but maybe that was just an artistic choice at the time.
That's the thing that I wonder about, like, where was he in the manga at this point? Like, when the final episode was, like, written, directed, shot, whatever. Because it is a very odd choice to, like, start with an episode of The Black Swordsman when they had no intention on finishing that for the entirety of the season. And then ending on such a cliffhanger. It would be less bad if it wasn't... if it never continued. But it just ended, and I'm like, well, that's very unsatisfying.
Yeah, I think I gotta agree. I know that the time is a flat circle and all that good stuff.
Right.
But it is really, unfortunately, the way it ends, there's no second season. Maybe OLM, being such a big powerhouse studio that pumps out a lot of stuff, maybe they expected to eventually get to season 2, but unfortunately the simple fact that they didn't get to it, the fact that we don't have it, I think the ending, as much as crazy as it was, as Tobias core and surreal as it was, did kind of fall flat a bit knowing that there was no continuation. I will say that coming into this, I was really hyped for the dark fantasy stuff. I had read the manga, they sort of, again, we're going to mention Demon Souls, but the Demon Souls-esque sort of aesthetic that was sort of backported, I guess, put it in a way, was really, really interested me. So when I saw that it was just going to be the old, boring, medieval, very realistic, quote unquote realistic, I was put off a bit initially. This is going to be a little boring. It's going to be more swords and less sorcery, but that sort of thing. I'm glad that it captivated me and it held my attention throughout, even the sort of the more boring warfare stuff and the political machinations we get. I was expecting to be bored by that. And let's just get to the point where Griffith murders everybody, But I wasn't. Like, I was captivated by it. In fact, to the point where I kind of wish they had given a little more meat to the ending. Because the whole last chapter, I felt a little rushed. Sure, we know that Griffith was hurt by Guts leaving. He spiraled into throwing basically it all away, but it felt a little too sudden to me, especially since a few episodes prior, Griffith had been almost godlike in how way he outmaneuvered everyone. He knew that the queen was planning to kill him, so he killed her back. He knew that little sniveling little Varys kind of dude he knew what he was plotting, and no matter how smart, how strong these people were, he always found a way out of it, which I figured was like the magical Bahamut thing. But he went from being such a powerhouse to immediately spiraling out of control. Does the manga flesh that out a little more?
Not really.
The overall story beats are still pretty much the same. Most of the cut content from Golden Age is kind of in like the middle sections. There's a couple other like demonic fights that they depict that kind of gets cut. So, of course, Zod is the first introduction that the Band of the Hawks see, but there's other aspects of Guts interacting with otherworldly beings that they kind of cut, mostly because it has rather adult content in it. And I think they kind of toned that down here. But in terms of what you're referencing with like kind of the quick Griffith kind of, to put it plainly, kind of messing up.
Yeah.
It really does kind of happen exactly like that in the manga. From what I recall, because what's up?
Well, I was going to say, after you finish your thought, do we want to sort of step back and sort of establish, what we're dealing with here? Like, what is the setup of all of our players here in this story?
As far as what role they serve,
or just generally, like, what is the story? Like, what is Berserk? What is it about?
Oh, okay, right. We hadn't really done a plot synopsis, really.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, Austin, why don't you go ahead and give us that plot synopsis?
Well, shoot, now that you say it. So I guess sort of we've established kind of our general feelings about the show overall, but I think we should go back to the beginning a little bit and sort of set up, what is Berserk? Who are the players? What is the context here? So basically it's this dark medieval world, fairly grounded and realistic, at least in the golden age, after the first episode that sort of shows all these, evil creatures and whatnot that Guts is dealing with. But whenever we get to the actual section that the anime is about, it's these warring factions against each other. We've got our main character, Guts, who's this, like, young, up-and-coming warrior. He's really got a chip on his shoulder about everything. And we see him from his perspective first, and then we're introduced to Griffith and Casca and the Band of the Hawk, which is basically their military mercenary group that they work, basically for hire for whichever kingdom is willing to, give them the money to serve them in their never-ending wars of conquest and land and castles and all that crap. So a very sort of standard fantasy, sort of medieval-esque setting, not directly placed in any specific country or any specific time period, which I think is definitely the best way to go, because a franchise that I really appreciate is Pirates of the Caribbean. And one of the things that I think really freed them to be able to kind of do whatever they wanted to is that they intentionally put it in a vague past, a vague time period, where they could take all these ideas and nobody was going to be like, well, that wasn't actually invented until 1794, and you've got this thing that's, this takes place in the 1500s, and what this is coming to 200 years later. They kind of avoid all of that by just being like, this takes place in Midland, which is vaguely Europe, so they can kind of get out of all the nonsense of historical things, but still fairly grounded, which I think is what makes the fantasy and the dark demons, creatures, and stuff sort of really palpable later on whenever they do show up. But that's basically the setup, right? Guts, he meets Griffith, and they're kind of at odds with one another, but they notice sort of this spark in one another, and their relationship grows over time. There's a lot of complicated things that happen over the course of the show, but
yeah, that's essentially the main premise, with just, Guts joining the Band of the Hawk, and then over the course of the show seeing the Band of the Hawk as a mercenary group really rise in rank and prestige with the other, like, houses and court of Midland. There's definitely a lot in the show about, the class divide. The nobles really look down on Griffith and the band, but they're just extremely capable in this war that Midland is with the Kingdom of Tudor at this point. That it's just, you get to see that kind of rise as they kind of rise up the ranks and win more and more battles, and thus get more and more fame and public approval.
Yep.
And I think the big sort of turning point, they're working as mercenaries, they're getting power and prestige. In particular, Griffith is, because he believes he is going to become someone of importance one day. He's going to rule the world. But really what it comes down to is they're living for Griffith's dream, and Guts is realizing that that's not his dream. He, in fact, spies Griffith telling Princess Charlotte, who he's trying to sort of use as his angle to get into royalty. Griffith tells Charlotte, I don't really respect anyone who follows orders, follows other people. That I want to do what I want to do, and this is my path in life. And Guts takes this, he sees it, his friend, okay, well, I can't live my dream by following yours. Mm-hmm. So he's working himself up to the point of leaving. And that's really where things sort of break down, is Guts wants to become his own man and live his own life. And so much of Griffith's, desire is built upon Guts, because Guts, we talk about how realistic this series is, but Guts is himself the least realistic part. He just murks dudes left and right. We talk about when there's a point where he and Casca get separated from the group in a forest, and they're having to get back, and he fights and kills 100 dudes. There's a part where they're in the tower. I think there's 2 or 3 parts where they're in towers, and he's just effortlessly killing people with his ridiculously huge Buster Sword.
It scenes like that specifically that really hammer it home how influential this was on the Dynasty Warriors video games, because basically those games are just that scene.
Exactly. Real, I know. Didn't they make the PS3 game, the Berserk?
Well, that's one of those.
They do. It's
that's one of those weird things that comes full circle, right? So Berserk, this idea of a lone warrior in a field, just wrecking and mowing down hordes of enemies, came from the Berserk manga and the Berserk anime. And then, like a decade and a half later, they made a Dynasty Warriors Berserk game. So it all kind of comes back to feed into one another.
So I guess at that point, what do we feel about that? We mentioned how abrupt Griffith's change was at that, but we so much of that is about being your own person and following your own desire and living your life. How do we feel how that plays into Guts' growth and into Griffith's
I think
fall?
a lot of those themes I think are some of the best parts of Berserk.
Totally.
And I think you see it most vividly in Golden Age, which is why I think a lot of fans consider this to be, pun unintended, the Golden Age part of the manga, is that you really get to see a lot in the forefront about how much that, like, Griffith, kind of you said, is kind of leading everyone onto his dream, but there's always that one thing in the back of his mind that Guts is always someone that is very different for him. Griffith talks about how Guts is the one person that, for a brief moment, makes him forget about his own dream, and he can't always get a fix on why he feels that way. Meanwhile, Guts, exactly again to your point, is at the point feeling pressured by himself to leave because he feels that he can't really stand as an equal to someone great like Griffith if he has nothing that he's really fighting for. The Band of the Hawk is very enamored with Griffith, and he's just such a charismatic person, and Guts also gets a lot of that, like, following, but Guts isn't very charismatic at all. He just kind of gets that more so earned from his battlefield expertise. So Guts has a lot of this, like, potential, but he doesn't really know where to put it.
Well, that's the thing. I think
that kind of conflict adds.
Yeah, I think it's that central conflict of, like, well, we saw kind of Guts' upbringing. We see some flashbacks to, him as a child. Like, he starts off with this, honestly, kind of comical origin where they say, like, he's a man that was born from a corpse or something like that. And that sort of sets him up to be this sort of dark, tragic figure. As a young man, he's under the foot of this horribly abusive, like, soldier dude that he's being raised by, for lack of a better word. And he
Not
learns.
even like a better word, he is being raised by him.
Well, yeah, I mean, raised in a sense of, like, well, he's being constantly abused. I don't really think there's much fatherliness going on there. But
yeah, fair enough.
that's what I meant. But, like, and so Guts grows up, he has this horrible sense of self-worth where it's entirely entangled in his ability to kill people and perform on the battlefield. So whenever he starts making these bonds with the people in the Band of the Hawk and with Griffith and with Casca, etc., he's being challenged in a way where his self-worth never would have been able to let him see himself that way previously. So there's a lot of complexity of all the characters interacting with themselves and trying to reconcile how others see them versus how they see themselves.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's kind of where I wanted to lead the discussion. Is we think about dark fantasy, we think about the demons, we think about everything's dark, we think about the blood and the murder and the rape and all that stuff. But what I like about Berserk is that it shows you how these characters got to that point. We see Guts based on that abuse he handled as a child and how that sort of has led him to just be a violent person. The point that is his entire personality. He leaves because he wants to go beyond just being the tough guy with a sword. We see that with the other characters as well. Griffith, even though Griffith is just, he believes in his fate, in his ability to rise above and rule the world, we see some of the stuff that's brought him to that point. The abuse that he suffered as well. And he's not just a one-note bad guy character,
I think pretty much every single one of the main characters, it showed some form of abuse. Which is actually something that was notably absent from the movies. They definitely just ignored that. They hinted at it for Griffith, but everyone else, they just didn't address it. But yeah, like Casca was running away from people, and Griffith threw down a sword and told her to defend herself, and she did. It seemed like a very, very large part of all their whole story. Like, they all had like a terrible upbringing, basically. But they're trying to make something of themselves now, and they're not going to let their circumstances, stop them from accomplishing their goals.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing about how the Casca flashback that we see is a great example of how pretty much everyone in the Band of the Hawk really idolizes Griffith because he's kind of helping them, show them what else they can do with their lives, even if it is fighting for someone else's dream and glory.
Yeah, I really liked how that played off. With Griffith, we get to the point where they take that one impenetrable fortress, and we see the guy running it is the one that molested him years ago, and the way he finally comes together, and he's trying so desperately to have Griffith to save him. Like, remember the good times? And Griffith just like, no, like murks the guy. No. And it just feels like a really great way it comes around, you know?
That was funny, though, because Griffith was just like, no, I used you, and I'm going to kill you now, and you're going to have to deal with that.
Exactly. Right. And kind of going back to what you said, Will, like, I think it's easy. Sometimes it's easy for me to forget in this story that, like, the Band of the Hawk, like, all of the members in it, these are all low-class peasantry, basically. So, really, there is no path for success for most of these people outside of what they're doing. At least success that this world and this societal structure sees as success. Because, I mean, you constantly see the class struggles here where, like, you know, as Griffith and the band sort of garner more prestige, all of the nobles in Midland instantly want to make sure they never reap any rewards from that. They want to cut them down so that they will not threaten their power and prestige. So I think one of the things that a lot of this is kind of not necessarily spoken. It seems like a lot of the allure for the Band of the Hawk to be brought to Griffith and this dream of his is because, well, this is really the only path they have out of, you know, the misery of, like, medieval peasantry. It's just like this is their path to making, quote unquote, making something out of their lives rather than just being poor farmers forever.
That's kind of what the mercenary class was doing. You could make some money. You didn't have to starve if you would just pick up a sword and possibly die. It just happens to be that this group in particular had a really good leader that made them a thing. So I really like the parts in, you know, when things start to turn, when they realize, oh, we get to be nobles now. It was kind of nice to have them sort of reinvent themselves briefly. Unfortunately,
that ballroom.
They were
scene
all like
is one of
really
my
excited
favorites.
about it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. No, I love the ballroom scene where Guts gets to dress the fancy collar. And
Casca's like,
good.
this dress is so impractical. What if we get attacked?
Yeah.
I don't want to constantly do comparisons to the 4C movies because I feel like we can kind of do all of that at once. But I feel like that scene, I don't know, resonated a little bit funnier, a little bit more awkward in the 4C movies. So I'll just drop that out there and leave that for now. We don't have to talk about it.
Well, let's go over sort of individually our thoughts about this series. So, Rand, what the things we haven't talked about yet? What other things do you want to point out about 97?
We pretty much have talked about most of what I wanted to say. Like, it does a really good job of capturing, like, the important points of the Golden Age. Like Will said, it does cut out a bit in the middle, but Golden Age is really long. Like, really long. And they did a good job pacing it. They emphasized the bits that needed to be emphasized. And overall, the quality was solid. Like, I thought that the Zod introduction was done super well, where it's just like no music for a time, and they're just like a bunch of people getting murdered by this supposedly immortal soldier, which turns out to be true. And then they fight. Guts gets utterly destroyed. Zod sees the Bayonet and freaks out, and then that kind of leads into like, oh, so Griffith is actually special, and this actual demon is afraid because he has a special necklace. Like, they focused well, and I thought, like, that's probably because, you know, Miura was directly involved. But despite it being like a 90s anime, the fight scenes were, like, better than a lot of modern shonens.
I think that from a narrative perspective, this series, like, almost completely works for me within the parameters of this being one chapter in a much longer story. and by that I mean like it feels like the dramatic pacing of this show, like going from, you know, we introduce Guts, right? He's this kid with a chip on his shoulder. He meets Griffith and everything changes. He becomes buddy with the Band of the Hawk. You know, years pass, they do some cool stuff. This big demon guy gets introduced, and like we learn about the Bailet, you know, all that stuff. You know, hitting these notes, it feels like just around the corner of every story beat is another thing that sort of like nudges us towards the edge of something, of some new revelation. And I think stories that tell their stories in that way are just inherently a lot more interesting, because it feels like every episode or two there's always something that sort of changes the status quo, you know, and we can see a lot of foreshadowing early on of what those status quo changes might be. Like whenever Griffith eyes Princess Charlotte for the first time, you know, me even having seen the Golden Age trilogy first and knowing kind of how things go, I think the anime really communicates is like, oh, he is scheming right now. There is something that's going to happen. He's going to try and use this girl for something, and we can see it coming a mile away. Same with the Nosferatu Zod fight of like we encounter this big demon, and we see this supernatural stuff for the first time, and it's just like, oh, we know something else is coming down the pipe. I think the show does a really, really great job at priming us to always be on the edge of our seat.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think some of that is because the first episode, maybe because of that, or maybe because I went into this already knowing the broad story beats. If this had just been a Conan-style adventure, I don't know if it would have kept my attention as much, but anticipating the eclipse, anticipating the falling out, anticipating that Griffith was going to be the villain at the end of the day, I think that kept me more invested than it would have otherwise. Which is to say nothing of the fact that I think that the Golden Age stuff did work out. I think seeing their different battles was interesting. I did enjoy Mr. Korowitz as a recurring comedic relief villain. I think that surprisingly did work for me. Surprisingly. And catching the little glimpses of their backgrounds and whatnot. I wasn't expecting to like any of that, but absolutely did.
One thing I kind of wish is I wish we had gotten a little bit, and maybe this happens in the manga, so manga freaks tune in. Do we get more context for some of the other Band of the Hawk members that don't really get as much screen time? Because it seems like, I was kind of hoping that this wouldn't be the case, because it certainly was in the movies. A lot of the time, some of the Band of the Hawk members like Corcus and Rickard and Judo and Pippin, they all kind of seem a little Greek chorusy sometimes, where they just kind of comment on the things that we're seeing, or they talk about, like, oh, Griffith, he's such a great leader, blah, blah, blah. Guts really seems on edge right now. You know, this sort of, again, Greek chorusy kind of stuff. And I kind of wish there was a little bit more to that. I know we get more Rickett down the line, likewise with, well, mainly just him, really. But
yeah,
is there...
Literally just him.
Yeah. Is there more of that, or is this like a blind spot that is in the source material as well?
Not necessarily. Like, there are bits where you get a little bit more for Judo. I think the anime does show a fair bit about it, because Judo kind of has this thing for Casca that he never pursues because he knows that Casca is, like, very enamored with Griffith. But that's, like, kind of the most that we get.
It's pretty downplayed, even that, I think.
It really is.
The only time they really directly touched on it was when he was actively dying, and he was, like, trying to go to her. And he's just like, did I protect you? And she's like, yes, you protected me.
Yeah, that's a little too late for me.
He does get a moment where he talks about being like a jack of all trades, where like he even himself felt like he was never really good enough to lead or to do anything, but the Hawk kind of changed his perspective that he still had his purpose. So it really kind of is more so, like you said, like they kind of just kind of echo that sentiment and don't really have as much individuality, because a lot of that is really just focused on the core Guts, Griffith, Casca aspect.
And I get wanting to keep your narrative threads trim, right? I respect that. Mm-hmm. But I guess maybe I'm just a sucker for pain, right? So losing them would have felt a lot more horrible in the end if we had maybe gotten a little bit more from them.
I still thought it hurt, like, because you got to know them for like a really long time, and in the manga it was a really long time, and then just in an instant they're all wiped out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I still think that
even
works,
though they're not explored as deep, they still
Yeah.
have like their own individuality,
Mm-hmm.
and they have personality, which you can't really say for a lot of other series that have like these minor characters.
Like you know what type of character Corcus is. He's the naysaying asshole who just exists to get on Guts' nerves.
Yeah, he's the Corcus.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember that guy's name. I was like, is it Conquer? Is it
Conquer.
Conquer? What's that guy's name?
Corcus was just having a perpetual bad fur day, man.
I mean, Corcus is not really a better name if you think about it, but were we really in paying him when Corcus bit it? I don't
Not
think
really.
so.
Corcus, Borcus, Dunkus.
More like Dorcas.
Oh,
Yeah, got him. I gotta stand my boy Pippin. We love a big boy on the Third Impact Anime Podcast.
that he is a big boy.
I remember the first time when I was watching the movie, and Judo kind of comes out of nowhere and is still alive, despite the fact that he's not alive for very long. I was just like, yes, Judo survived. Maybe he'll make it. Oh, God. Oh, no. Not at all. No.
Yeah.
But a lot of what makes Berserk for me is, I think, really kind of what we've talked about with that deeper level of those characters and themes. I feel like a lot of that we get to see kind of in the forefront as the events of this whole aspect of Golden Age is taking place over many years as they're slowly rising up, that you get to see a lot of those themes and that character growth really progress over time. Guts is constantly struggling with what he should be doing. Is he going to leave? Is he not going to leave? It really does act like a prologue to like the whole Berserk as a whole, really.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
And his
and I think that's why it makes it so easy to digest as one thing.
Right. And in a way, Guts' relationship with Griffith isn't really all that complicated, but his relationship with Casca takes a lot of different twists and turns throughout the series that I do appreciate. We haven't really talked about Casca very much. So she's basically our second main character, but well, I think that her story is just as essential to the narrative that plays out as Guts and Griffith.
It is. Especially, like, towards the end of the war, when she, like, really breaks out on her own and just shows how capable she truly is.
Yeah, it sort of ties into the idea of the idea of the dream. So the point, unlike Guts, Casca does believe in Griffith. She's drinking the Griffith Kool-Aid the entire time. Mm-hmm. She sees him as being this important person that even she, as a capable agent, unlike Corcus, unlike Judo, unlike the other people, she's someone who has risen above and is still worshiping Griffith. She sees how important he is. And to see that sort of transition, especially as Guts decides to leave and she notices this and she's completely confused. Why would you want to leave this? This is the man that's going to change everything. This is paradise. And when she realizes that she's living someone else's dream, she's following someone else, I think that's where things start to turn. And when Guts beats Griffith in that battle, she realizes how right he is to do that.
When Griffith starts to lose control over Guts is really when he starts to unravel, because Guts has a lot of that admiration already that it can really just unravel a lot of what Griffith has built up, which I think is what adds to his very quick spiral. Because he, when he first meets Guts, he's like, you belong to me now. You're mine,
yeah.
my property.
Right.
Exactly. I think she realizes that at that point too, like she has been property to Griffith the whole time, the same way that all of the Hawk has been. And when she sees Guts break out from that, she's still a year later trying to free Griffith, because she has that belief that if she just gets Griffith out, things will go back to like the way they were. That's her sense of normalcy is tied to that person. And I think in that last chapter, when Guts comes back, she resists it. She's tore up about Guts destroying everything, really, and realizes, I think, that she has feelings for him. Maybe because of that? How do we feel on that? Because I kind of feel like, on the one hand, that it just felt, okay, this is a romance story. She's the female character. We kind of have to do this. I don't know. How do we feel about them getting together?
Part of me kind of feels like what we've talked about in sense of like kind of just Guts being the one kind of showing her, hey, there's more than life than following someone else's dream. I think kind of breaking her from that kind of adds on to her in that regard.
I read it a little bit as like a little of both, and like a bit of yeah, she's the female character, so we have to have a romance plot, yay. But I think reducing it to that would be flattening it a little bit too much, because I think that what we do have is pretty complicated, right? I mean, I think calling some people would get mad to call like Berserk like a love triangle drama, but it is like it just is. It just is. And Casca's feelings about Casca dealing with her issues of self-worth, just like everyone else, is pretty unique in her own way, which I think is important, that these characters are unique in their struggles, even if a lot of their issues sort of manifest in similar ways. So she has a difficulty opening up to Guts because she thinks that Guts is sort of being put on this. He's being put on this pedestal that she wants to be on by Griffith. Exactly. So there is this tinge of jealousy here at the beginning, especially. But she's constantly torn between like, well, if Guts is the one that Griffith wants to put on this pedestal, and I believe so much in Griffith's dream, I shouldn't be the one to tear that down. So I think that's why she gets so mad that Guts wants to leave, because ultimately that's against what Griffith wants.
Right.
While dealing with the internal conflict that she wants to be that one. She wants to be that person, but she also knows she's not. But it's like a really long road for her to get there. Yeah. I think Griffith really has to be removed from the situation for her to really see what's going on. And even then, I don't know if she fully grasps that, because by the time she really does become more autonomous and more self-sufficient, well, the eclipse happens and it kind of undoes all of that.
Yeah. It really was an unhealthy relationship. It was like a codependence there.
All these people are terrible.
I like so much in the beginning. We see Casca as someone that rejects like her gender and rejects like all the bad stuff that comes with her gender. Like her whole introduction is she getting sold into sex slavery with a noble, and Griffith freeing her from that.
Yeah.
And that one point where he's got to like lay with him to warm him up. She despises that, detests that, and she detests Guts the entire time. Partially because he is this badass that just showed up one day and has taken her spot as Griffith's number 2. But I think there's, it all comes to a head in the part where they get lost in the forest. She gets almost captured because she's having her period, and she's having I think it's just like general sickness that sort of leads her into that situation. Mm-hmm. And I think those scenes where she's like fighting against these preconceived notions, this patriarchy, I guess to use the word in a general sense. Like she fights against that. I found that so interesting, which to me maybe I guess that what it comes down to is the fact that she eventually becomes the love interest and, as you said, a love triangle to some degree. I don't know. Like I kind of get it. I kind of glad that she's found some meaning, even if it's in another man. Kind of. Yeah. Like she still feels freed by it, but it does make me feel a little weird that it had to be that. To say nothing of the last episode, but that's
right. It's interesting you mention her rejecting her gender as well, because I remember the one scene where I think it was the final part of the war, where she's in the fortress fighting with the one general, and her helmet gets knocked off, and they're like, wait, she's been a woman the whole time? And like it made me realize, I'm like, oh yeah, like Casca really didn't have like stereotypical like video game female armor. Like her armor was the same as everyone else's. And it made me think, I'm like, you know what, good for you, Miura, you were rejecting that idea back in the 80s.
Yeah, I do think it was weird they gave her like pink and there were some skirt like frills around it, which I thought a little weird, but whatever. I agree that it wasn't, chainmail bikini bullshit. It was
more so it wasn't obvious to like diegetically, it wasn't obvious to the rest of the world that she was a woman, because she was just a badass, and they were like, we have to kill them because they're killing all our soldiers, not haha, woman weak, we kill woman. It's like, no, she earned the bounty on her head.
But still, and this is part of what I'm fascinated by in the writing. It's just like Casca is constantly dealing with the fact that yes, she is a woman in a man's world, like very literally, not saying that in a colloquial way. It's just literally what is happening in front of the screen, and Miura and the scriptwriters do not shy away from confronting that basically head on. Like, lots of horrible things happen to Casca simply because she is a woman, and they also deal with the realities of what it's like to exist as a woman in reality, which includes having your period. And if you're a woman warrior on the battlefield, that's it. It just doesn't go away. You have to deal with that. So I think that it's quite fascinating in the ways that they allow Casca to basically embrace, like, she's not just another guy that happens to be a girl. They like completely embrace her femininity, and they work that into how she is perceived in the world and how she is treated by others and how she sees herself.
It adds another whole layer to her while everyone else is kind of, the lower class fighting for the Hawk, but then she's also dealing with that aspect on top of everything, and still becomes a compelling character that I think is handled pretty well at this part of the.
It would have been really easy for them to just be like, to write a character that is a female warrior, and maybe some snide remarks get thrown at her every now and again, but that's basically the extent of her femininity. It would have been really easy to do that. I think we can all probably think of examples of that. But they don't. They decide to make her complex because it would be complex. It is complex.
And you see a lot of, like, Berserk is known for having a lot of that more, like, sexual type of violence and aspects seen and everything. Yeah. And I think, for the most part, Miura, I think, tackles it very well and depicts it, like, tastefully, as weird as that is to say. Especially in kind of this Golden Age aspect of
Golden Age is definitely the most tame of the arcs when it comes to, like, nudity and stuff like that.
I mean, I mentioned the very first panel of the series is Guts going to town on his succubus.
It is. It definitely has those moments, but I think at the same time he does a good job at, taking these traumatic events that are happening to these people and showing how it impacts them. It's never like just for shock value or for like the plot. Like, it actually, those characters take it with them and they kind of carry it through everything else that's going on. And, a lot of that I think is something that's difficult to tackle in media. And I think Berserk does it in a more fashion than you would expect, given its reputation.
Right.
And I guess it kind of goes down to, like, that final scene is, I guess, what also hurts that we don't see more Berserk, the TV series that is. Straight up when Finto is born, the first thing he does is rape Casca in front of Guts. And it's a hard scene to watch, but when you see what's happening there, Fento is looking cut straight in the eye the entire time. It's very much a power play. And it's like, Absolutely. I've taken your friends, I've taken your loved one in front of you. You're being held down and gored by my demons. Like, on the one hand, I hate it because Kasuga is such a strong character. I hate that the fact that they kind of, in a way, have reduced her to being the female character. On the other hand, they built her out to be this thing, and to see Guts, see his good friend, like, destroyed in front of him. It's painful to watch. And so much of, it's easy to put Mars Attacks aliens on the screen. It's so easy to put just a couple horror movie references, but when you see everything come together, it's, it's hard to not compare it to, for instance, End of Evangelion, where so much weird shit is happening.
Yeah.
It's a very horrific sexual imagery is happening on the screen. Very similarly here, it put like a really like pit in my stomach to watch a lot of that.
Yeah.
Because of how just bad it feels.
It hits in the horror even on its face value. I mean, that's for sure. But it hits even more because we've gone through this journey with these characters, and we know what brought them here psychologically, and that's the part that makes it truly devastating.
Yeah.
Even to see Griffith sort of make that change. We see him being this figure on a pedestal to making a bad decision in a world where that is not tolerated, to immediately getting mind broken. And even though he's still trying to be a good guy, at least a part of the last two episodes, he does make the decision at the end of the day, fuck it, these people don't mean anything to me, and this is the way I will step to power. He does make the decision to go ahead with it.
Yeah. I think also, given where the anime ended, it ended with Casca being raped. Like, that did not resolve. Like, that is where it ended. I think that also is what kind of made that, the entire resolution of it just feel really uncomfortable, because the image, the specific frame that they ended on was like absurdly graphic, even for a 90s anime, and to just end the series on that, like, granted, I imagine at the time they did not intend to end the series, but still they did, so it just made it like holy crap. And
well, it's also difficult to talk about like characters like Casca in the whole scope of Berserk, because there's like so much I could say that I'm not going to spoil anymore.
Yeah,
thank you.
But there's so much more that happens that it's so unfortunate we don't really get to see it here.
If you watch the movie, you know what happens to her in a broad sense, and like where I'm at, nothing much has really changed from that. I know you know something that I don't. But yeah, like Casca remains relevant.
She definitely remains relevant. But again, I don't want to dwell on my dissatisfaction with how her character was handled after this arc.
Let me just take this moment. I think we've talked about it enough. Can we spend some time comparing it to the 4C movies? I think I'm ready to talk about that.
Sure. I do want to give like a kind of funny / I was a bit of an idiot aside regarding that scene though. So when I was reading the manga initially, this was before COVID, and I know this because I was still in the office. And I had some downtime, so I was like, I'll read a chapter of Berserk while I wait for tickets to come in. And I happened to be in the middle of the eclipse. And I just, I pull up to a panel where Casca is full spread. And I'm just like, I probably shouldn't read this at work. And so I put my phone away, but I was like, quickly looking around to make sure that nobody saw what I was like looking at, because I didn't want to have to explain it to anybody.
And after Ryan cleaned out his desk, he went home and finished the story. But anyway, so
okay. Yeah, I mean, if we want to go ahead and break into that, do we want to do maybe sort of any final thoughts? I gave Ryan the opportunity to mention stuff, but do we have any extant things to discuss? I guess, Austin, for you, it would probably be the 4C movies, honestly.
Yeah, that would really be the only thing left I would really want to discuss, I believe. I mean, I think a lot of the things...
Well, let's just go ahead. Yeah. Let's go ahead and just talk about the 4C movies,
sure.
And then we'll end with whatever Will wants to say.
Sure. I don't want to dwell too much on this, but here's my feelings on the 4C movies. So I think, I said this earlier, I think the issues with the animation are a little bit overstated for me. In the first movie, they're rough. I'll definitely give it that, but it's one of those things that definitely is improved upon in the second one and third one. The first one is a little rough for sure. Certainly, like, light years better than the 2016 and 17 adaptations. So, got that out of the way.
I haven't even touched those, just because, like, one, that arc is just kind of terrible, and also I know everything, like the memes about it and all that, and I don't even know if it's worth watching out of, like, irony.
And just for the viewers' benefit, the anime that came out in the 2016 and 2017, it's 2 seasons, and it adapts arcs past the Golden Age. Whereas the movies by 4C is just essentially going over a Golden Age again. They made these anime adaptations of arcs going forward. That is the only time they've been animated, and they are not super great. I don't want to dwell on too much, but just for needed context there, yeah, it covers the next arc and a half, basically. Because there's still a large portion that is not yet, I'm going to say yet, not yet adapted rather, to the screen.
That's kind of one of the things I was saying earlier. There is a lot that really, like, should be adapted, like, now. Like, somebody should try again with a better studio and just adapt. I honestly start from the beginning. Just start over, go forward, and, like, adapt the entirety of Berserk, because
maybe they should just let 4C do it anyway.
Maybe they should let Studio Orange do it. I mean, if they can do Trigun, they can do Berserk.
Dude, that'd be so good. But anyway,
it would.
So another thing about the 4C movies, I feel like some of the scenes for me hit a little bit stronger just in the way that they were executed. Maybe it was the subtleties of the animation. Maybe it was just me. I don't know. There were certain scenes I feel just were executed a little bit better in those. Like, for instance, Griffith's interactions with Princess Charlotte whenever they first meet. I thought that was done a little bit better in the 4C movies. The ballroom scene, I thought was done a little bit better in those. And for ill, depending on your stomach for certain things, the eclipse is a lot more graphic in the 4C movies.
It really
by a
is.
significant margin. And depending on your stomach for that kind of thing, that could be seen as a plus because it's, of course, more accurate to the manga, or a downside because it is not easy to watch. So
no, like, the clips in the 4C movies made me uncomfortable, like, genuinely uncomfortable. Like, I'd mentioned earlier, I was dating Marissa at the time we were watching it together, and, like, afterwards she wanted to, like, cuddle, and I was like, no, you need to get away from me. Like, I do not want to be touched right now.
Yeah, just need some space.
Yeah, like, that was not a comfortable movie.
No, and I feel like Griffith's deterioration even prior to that, after he had been, tortured for a year, which we didn't really even talk about that necessarily.
That is the one thing the anime really glossed over. Like, it did just kind of... It kind of skipped about, like, kind of really exploring what happened to Griffith and just how bad it was.
Yeah, and I feel like it was a little bit more harrowing in the presentation in the 4C films.
The one thing that I wonder, and it's definitely one of those things that's like, leave it up to your imagination, but, like, in every like version that's been done so far, Guts removes Griffith's helmet mask and is just like, oh my god, and then, like, puts it back on immediately, and it's just like,
that's true.
And it's just like, don't look at him. And, like, from what you can kind of see, he doesn't look that bad. So, like, it really makes me wonder, like, what did he see?
Kids listening at home, if you like that cool mask, you should definitely watch the movie Phantom of the Paradise.
It's the sequel to Berserk.
Great movie, cool mask. And Mamo from the Mystery Mamo is in it, too.
Oh, really?
But anyway.
Now, I will say, for those who may or may not have seen the 4C movies already, last year... they did kind of a recut, I'll say, of the movies called the Memorial Edition, where they were essentially re-edited to be broadcast on TV. I want to say it's like, like 10 or so, maybe
I think
less
it's
than
13.
10, like, quote-unquote episodes. It might be 13. Yeah. But they essentially kind of clean up a little bit of the animation. I have not watched the Memorial Edition, so I don't know how much they change in terms of the visual aspects.
Are they licensed and available over here?
That is a great question.
I will find out right now.
I know that they are from last year. I don't know if they're available. I know that actually, you know what I do know is that they did announce a Blu-ray set for it, but I don't know if that's for our region or
it's
not.
on Crunchyroll.
Japan. Oh, really?
Oh, is it really? Yeah. Well, shoot. How about
there you
that?
Go.
Well, I would say if the animation from back then is a little bit jarring for your taste, I might recommend trying, instead of watching the movies, watch the recut of Memorial Edition. Most famously, it added the, quote, like, Bonfire of Dreams scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in the 97 anime that is surprisingly not in the Golden Age movies originally. Like when Guts and Casca are having their talk around the bonfires of the Band of the Hawk. Which I think is a very important scene for Golden Age, and I was very surprised when it was just not in the original movies, or not really expanded upon.
Well, that was going to be...
So that might be a better thing to look at.
That was going to be my downside of the 4C movies, is that, of course, you know, just by the nature of them being films, being, like, less than half the runtime of the 90s show, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's not there. But a lot of the stuff that they did adapt is adapted sometimes better, in my opinion, than the 90s
They did the
version.
music better. The important scenes were better animated, for sure. The only thing for me about it is it was that weird pseudo 3D style, and there were certain moments where I was like hyper aware of that fact.
Yeah, no, I mean that's certainly true. That's certainly true. I think the show looks its best whenever it's doing 2D stuff, or like composited stuff. But when especially in that first movie, it can be rough.
The first movie was rough. I definitely think it benefited in the Eclipse because the dome was like that full 3D, and just the way it was animated, it really brought out just how dreadful that was.
Yeah.
It also really helps to see, you know, how Guts gets out of Eclipse Town.
Yes. Well,
we actually get to see a lot
that's
more
a
context
given.
there.
Like it does, it finishes the plot.
It primed me. Like walking away from finishing the 90s show, I was just like, well, shoot, I don't want to have anything to do with this, you know, because it's just horrible. There's really nothing that makes me want to walk away from that and like go back to the source material, but the ending of the third 4C movie, it really does prime you to want to know what happens next, because you get that little tease of, you know, how Guts got out, what the new status quo is, and you really want to see how they go forward.
Yeah.
And now you see why I got sucked into the manga all those years ago.
Once you get past it in the manga also, because this is the third time that I've experienced the Golden Age, because I watched the 4C movies, then I read it, and now I watched it again. And like, it's still a really solid arc. And once you get past it in the manga, though, it starts, the series takes on an entirely different tone in like the best way possible.
Well, speaking of the manga here, how does one absorb the Berserk manga in 2023?
You can buy the volumes.
You subscribe to Young Animal magazine in Japan, or you can get the manga. The manga has been slowly releasing on a pretty steady schedule, hiatus jokes aside. So there are currently 41 volumes you could buy physically. Volume 41 came out, I want to say, earlier this year or late last year, and that is the last of the Minura chapters. So it's pretty almost all the way caught up.
Are these those big, thick tomes? 41 of those.
Great question. I'm glad you brought that up. So, no. So they still make regular, I don't know what the term would be, like
volumes,
traditional
tankobon.
size, regular volumes of manga.
Tankobon.
Yeah. They make those still. Now, they have been doing the deluxe versions, which are, of course, those massive leather hardback big tomes that I am slowly acquiring. But
they call them chunguses in the industry.
Yes, I believe that is the technical term.
Chungai is the plural.
No, it's Greek. It's Greek. Chungus is Greek. It's Chungus.
So those have 3 volumes per. So if you buy the first Chungus of Berserk, it has the entirety of the Black Swordsman arc in it. And then Chungus 2 is the first 3 volumes of Golden Age, etc. Those are all not out currently. I think there's like 10 or so out.
I saw 13 when I was in Barnes & Noble last, so they're coming out.
Is 13 already
They're
out?
coming out pretty fast. Like, they're catching up, honestly.
I was going to say 13 should keep it on pace for adapting, or rather releasing all of the Berserk that is currently out. Because I think if they keep it the 3 volume per... I can't speak. If they keep track with the 3 volumes per Chungus, then it should be around 13 of those big ones, which I think is a great benefit if you're okay with holding a giant, massive book, because you get to see Minura's art blown up and like scaled upward, I should say, in like a really good way. Like, it's a really good way to visualize and see all that art in person versus the smaller manga size that you're really used to.
I need to fact check myself on this, but I heard a statistic that apparently Berserk is the best-selling Dark Horse property, period.
I've heard that too.
Period.
Yeah.
More than any sort of Western comic or anything. And that was before the deluxes were coming out.
Wow.
Well, what about digital? How does one such as myself who doesn't appreciate tree pulp, how would a digital nerd like me?
Well,
your local library.
So, to be completely frank, I mentioned earlier it was I believe the Skull Knight forums. They post a lot of information with chapters and just Berserk news in general. It's a very active community since like the 90s.
Okay.
Young Animal's website actually, this is like as of like a couple weeks ago, have released like almost all or all of Berserk for free to read on their website, but it is in its non-translated Japanese form.
Right.
But I thought that was pretty neat.
Pretty sure it's on all your major digital storefronts as well. Like if you wanted to get it on Kindle/Comixology, I'm pretty sure you would be able to do that, or Google Books or what have you. I don't think it's hard to find.
Yeah, probably.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the manga from this point on. As we discussed, Miura passed away a few years back. I know there was some talk about continuing it, not continuing it. What's the state of the future of Berserk?
Yes, so Berserk, when it was being written by Miura, he passed away when chapter 364 was the most recent chapter. Or rather, that was the last chapter that came out that he had written. And after his passing, there was a good, I want to say, year of just no news. There, in the fandom, was a lot of buzz of, is Berserk going to continue? Is Berserk done? As, you know, I'm not going to go into spoilers, but the last chapter that he released is definitely not an ending to Berserk, so there definitely is more to the story from where his last chapter was. Right. For a long time, there was a lot of debate on what was going to happen, a lot of radio silence, and then, a while ago, in 2022, they announced that Berserk would be continuing, and the way it was going to continue was going to be, essentially, Studio Gaga is the name of the studio of Minura's assistants that helped him with creation of the manga. So that studio is still working on it, but it is the Berserk project, I'll say, is now being supervised by Koji Mori. Mm-hmm. Koji Mori, I don't think is very famous in the West. He is also like a manga artist. He has more notably been very good friends with Minura for like his whole career, basically. They both kind of got into the industry around the same time. They're like best of friends. A lot of interviews in Young Animal from Minura also either mention or also Mori does interviews with him. Most famously, Mori's the one who kind of told the initial story about him and Minura playing Idolmaster, which kind of started that whole meme. Minura never was a huge Idolmaster fan, but the internet does what the internet does when hiatuses are in season.
Of course.
But anyway, Minura, since his passing, again, it's Mori who is taking over, and Mori has said in the announcement that he is going to be continuing the adaptation of Berserk, of course. He is only going to be making chapters and content based on things that Minura told him in person physically. Like, he's not going to embellish anything, he's not going to add anything, he's going to make it as true to Minura's vision as possible.
Right.
which I think is probably the best possible course of action for Berserk to continue. Because you have him doing it, his like best friend supervising it, and you have his assistant studio who's been like helping draw and fill in and detail all of the manga for many years, be the chief illustrators for it. And they have released a couple chapters since then. I think as of this recording, there's like 5 or 6 chapters that have come out, and it still looks like Berserk. The art style is very much the same as Miura's style. Where the manga is right now, I can't really comment on how people feel about the plot, because Berserk's in a really weird spot right now, plot-wise. But anyway.
How do you feel about it?
Without spoilers, I think it's totally fine, because Miura sadly passed away at the very end of an arc. So it's kind of a rough situation for Mori and Gaga to be in, because they have to wrap up this arc in a because big things are happening at the end of this arc, and now they have to enter the next arc, which Mori has said should be the final arc of Berserk.
Really?
But we will see.
So the end is in sight. Dang.
Miura said in an interview a handful of years ago that Berserk was already more than halfway done.
Okay.
But I don't know if that's like an Oda situation of, One Piece is totally like 80% done.
Oda said that when One Piece was on like chapter 800, and everyone was like, okay, dude, do you have any idea? But like, Miura, I definitely would believe him way more than I believe Oda.
From what I understand, that's the only time he's commented on the status. I could be wrong on that, but from what I've read, that's the only time he's been like, how close to an ending.
Well, even then, you sort of these folks they have to operate based on the information they have. If they want to, as they say, make it as close to what he wanted as possible, then the only thing you can do is sort of take what he said seriously. I mean, and do the best you can, right? So like, you wouldn't want to continue, because like the more they make, the further away they're going to get from anything that he may have dropped as a hint for where he would want to go. So I think even if he hadn't said that, it probably would have been a good idea to just make this the final arc of Berserk anyway, just to like, wrap it up in a somewhat swift, reasonable way, so that they can, put a bow on it, walk away from it, and be like, we did the best we could do. There you go.
That's just kind of the thing also, is like, I feel like his apprentice is going to respect like the legacy, so he's not going to milk it for everything it's worth. So I don't really, I thankfully don't see that being a problem.
As someone who's been following Berserk for, like almost 10 years now, which I know is not a lot compared to most people who've been following Berserk manga forever, but it's been a huge aspect of manga and anime fandom of my life. I was very content with Berserk just ending when Miura passed, because to me, Berserk is a lot more about the journey rather than the destination. He's done already so much for the industry and media in general that I was at a point where, we were over a year in with no news. I was like, okay, if this is the end of Berserk, I think I can make peace with that and move on. But so you have some fans who really just want to see, I need to see the ending, I need to see all this come to a head for the plot. And I think that Berserk is so much more than just the destination. But again, I think this is the best possible outcome if they were going to continue, which they are.
Yeah, I agree with you to a degree with that. But also, I am a person who really hates unresolved endings. Like, it drives me crazy if I, like, get invested in something and then it's canceled prematurely and I never get, like, resolution on, like, the plot or something. And, like, I hate bad endings as well. So, like, for me, like, any form of media, the ending is as important as the journey, just because it validates the journey. Like, if it ends well, everything that happened had a purpose, and it makes it very palatable for like a revisit.
There are 2 wolves inside of you. One of them is named Will, and the other one is named Ryan. One of these wolves is content. The other wolf is not.
Right.
But I think this, like, I hate that this is a lesson, a thing that I have to be put over a artist that has passed. But I really hope more people take this lesson from Miura's passing, and that if you have a long-form story, it does need to end. And sure, you got people like Oda that are doing a particular type of story. It's a shonen weekly sort of. It's going to be meandering by its very nature. I understand that. Even though,
frankly, it's his
does
job at this point to like do that.
Sure. I mean, on the other hand, Oda could probably retire and still be incredibly rich for the rest of his life. But with something like Berserk, it's not a meandering shonen story with cartoonish characters introduced every saga. Like, it has a story, and it is more mature and for adults. And yes, the jokes that he plays Idolmaster and for so long were a thing, but the fact of the matter is there has been like a hiatus. There has sat a long time on this story. Part of it because he was doing very successful. He could work on other things. I think didn't he have a lot of other apprentices, people besides Mori that were doing stuff for him, around him?
He did that. That was really the Studio Gaga. It's a collection of individuals. I unfortunately don't really know a lot of them by name. But there's been a lot of apprentices taken on that have worked with him, and then they would leave and more people would come on, because Miura, from what I understand, is very much like open to helping like teach the younger generation.
Yeah.
Well, that's really
awesome. He has a really good relationship with his assistants.
There are some creators that aren't quite so nurturing to the future generations. Miyazaki, but it's great that Miura pays that forward, because that was done for him whenever he was young. He working with his hero Bronson and the other gentleman whose name I forget, but that's really good to hear.
Right, and that I appreciate. But when you see somebody like, for instance, George R. R. Martin, that in the middle of his epic saga struck gold, and he's sitting on Winds of Winter for what? It's been 10 years since the TV series was started airing, which is already kind of there.
Been a while.
Funny you mentioned that, because he did do some conceptual design work for another Berserk fan project called Elden Ring.
Right.
He didn't he?
No, yeah, that's the thing with Miura too, is that like he didn't really do a lot of like huge side things during Berserk. He of course was like supervising other Berserk content, but he did announce like around 2015 or so working on another side manga called Duraki, something like that.
Okay.
That he famously is storyboarding, but mostly Studio Gaga are the ones who were like actually producing and making the art for that. So fans were very like, what are you taking time away from Berserk for to make this new manga? But it was very much so like him, doing a lot of the planning, and then the Studio Gaga was actually like physically drawing and making everything for it. I think is a way that kind of helps show them more about his art style, is kind of what a lot of fans were thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And to be clear, like, I don't want to be the guy with a whip in hand, hitting these people. Get back to work. Make my content for me. I don't want to be that. If they want to take a break, if George R. R. Martin says, fuck it, I'm never writing again, I'm just going to live in my theater for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
That's perfectly fine. If Miura said, you know what?
I'm always reminded of that one little Karibo sketch that he did, like, probably a decade ago. But basically, it was his response to, like, it was basically just anytime he was doing something in his actual life, this dude would just like pop up from the toilet and be like, why are you peeing when you could be making new episodes? And like, I get that from a creator's stance a lot of the time. It's like, doing this is your job. You want to enjoy your life, like, as well. So like, yeah.
Sure, like, I don't want to be the guy that is popping out of Miura's toilet telling him, put down the Idolmaster. But on the other hand, if you have a work and your work is a saga, like you said, it has to have an ending, and it's going to have an ending, whether or not you want it. If you pass away, I'm sure Mori knows broadly what Miura wanted, but I guarantee you, from up above in heaven or the eclipse or whatever his soul now resides, he's not going to be completely satisfied with the way Berserk ends. Because he just, again, I don't want to put a blame on him if he wanted to take other time. I wish, I guess, in the case of Miura, in the case of Martin, in the case of other creators, I wish they would be more honest with the fact that they are not going to be around forever. And if you're going to write an epic saga, you have to plot an end and you have to actually get it done. And I really hope that because of this, more manga creators that are planning long-term stuff take honest stock of that situation. When they realize, we see a lot more manga artists that are like losing the ability to draw manga, whether their eyes are giving out, whether their hands are giving out. I want to say the Hunter x Hunter guy. I can't think of his name now. Like he's trying to come back to do more Hunter x Hunter, but he can't because his hands are hurting, are in immense pain. And it's kind of like, I understand that, and I wish them the best. But if you're telling a long form story, you do have to take into consideration some of that in the case here. And I feel like that is sort of the tragedy at the end of the day of Berserk, the series. Is yes, you don't need to read the entire thing to get it. You can just watch the TV series. You can just watch the movies if you want. You can read the manga. It doesn't, like Will said, the destination is not the whole point, but it is a part of the point.
Correct.
And something I really hope that people take away at the end of the day is that you can't just be like Miura in that sense. You have to plot an ending and be realistic about achieving that ending.
Yeah, and just a real quick aside to say regarding the hiatuses of Berserk, which have become a huge meme, I think a lot of it really is just because of his strict attention to detail. Mm-hmm. Like, the art in Berserk and the panels of the manga are so intricate and beautiful that even with his frustrations of switching from like traditional to digital art during the time of Berserk, there's a famous story where he got kind of yelled at because he was literally going pixel by pixel when he was drawing all the intricate details.
That's the thing about his art, though, is you can tell that he puts that much detail in it. Like, you and I have been talking about it on the Discord for a while, but like I've been reading again, and if you join our Discord, shameless plug number 8, I think, you'll see, like, Will and I have been sharing panels from Berserk, and like the greatest thing about reading it is anytime you get a double page spread that is just this beautiful piece of art. And like anytime I come up on one of those, I will stop and just like soak it in for as long as I can possibly stand.
There really isn't anything like it, and especially where Berserk is in its second half, basically. Again, no spoils.
Yeah.
But a lot of the set pieces and art and what's going on is getting more complicated, for lack of a better term. And I think his, dedication to that is why, or a reason as to why the release kind of slowed down a little bit after time.
All right, well, we're going to take one last quick break here and come back with our final thoughts. right, so we're back here. Let's go ahead and give our closing thoughts on Berserk 1997. So, Austin, what were any sort of closing thoughts?
I'm extremely grateful that I was able to have an excuse to sit down and watch this 90s show, because it does have a distinct flavor that's different from the way that I've consumed Berserk in the past, you know, most specifically through the 4C movies that for some reason I watched twice. Why did I do that to myself? Anyway, because I love lush 90s peak peak cell animation stuff, and this is a treat for that. I mean, it's not the most beautifully gorgeous animated thing out there, but it is when it's pretty, it's really, really, really pretty. And I think it's a great story. The characters continue to be compelling to me, even this being my third time that I've consumed this particular arc. And as painful as Berserk as a series overall can be, with some of its really, really harrowing subject matter, I think it's truly fantastic. It's one of those it's a classic for a reason things, and I have a renewed energy to want to try and move forward with this story. The furthest I've gone is maybe 4 episodes into the 2016 show, to the point where I thought, well, this is not great, but if this is what I've got, then maybe I'll go for it. But, I say all that having not actually finished it, so maybe I didn't like it as much as I was trying to. But I would like to continue with the story. I do have the Berserk and the Band of the Hawk PS4 game, which apparently adapts a considerable portion of the the Millennium Empire arc.
Yes. It's Conviction arc, then Millennium of the Falcon Empire.
It has so many translations. It's like
Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
Millennium
Falcon. Yep.
Some translations call it the Millennium Falcon, others call it the Millennium Hawk, others call it the Glistening Hawk. It's so many different translations of that one.
When Han Solo shows up, that's when you know it's the next arc.
You mean Corcus? Okay, gotcha.
Oh no.
Yeah. Will and I also covered the Dreamcast game on an episode of Midshelf. It's called Sword of the Berserk Guts Rage.
Beautiful name.
And
yes,
it takes place after Conviction, right?
Yeah, it takes place like in the middle or right after Conviction arc. It is a non-canon story. Yeah. So you don't really need to. I
remember the game being
to be honest,
pretty okay though. Like we only stopped when we got to the Zod fight because it just kept kicking our butts.
It's really difficult. Yeah.
But yeah, I do have that game. I know it adapts a considerable portion after the Golden Age, but I do generally like Dynasty Warriors Musou games. Like last year, I beat Hyrule Warriors. Thought it was a blast. Played some of the Gundam ones, played some of the Dragon Quest ones. I like those games, so I guess that might be what I go for next if I don't get regular access to the manga. But since I already have the game, that's probably going to be in my future soon.
Yeah,
I think I need to go back and play that PS3 game as well. I didn't have a PS3 notably, but I think I did like a lot of the Dynasty Warriors aspect to this series.
It's on PlayStation 4 as well.
It's still available digital download, and I think is it on PC?
Yes.
Oh, it might be. I think it is actually.
Steam. Is it? Oh, okay. That's probably how I'll check it out.
The physical PS4 just got a re-release, which is great because that game was so expensive for like such a long time.
That's good.
So if you want it, you can actually get it.
Cool. All right. Well, Ryan, what are your sort of closing thoughts about Berserk 1997?
I pretty much said it all already, but like I really enjoyed it. Like I definitely think if this is your first exposure to Berserk, it's a really good exposure. But I'm gonna join Will now in telling everybody who will listen, like you should absolutely read the manga because it is one of the best mangas I've ever read. And I've read like god tier manga. Like I've read all of Naruto, man.
Wait, hold on.
A manga sommelier.
Hold on a second. Is Naruto Man different than Naruto?
Yes. Naruto Man is the Chibi spin-off starring Rock Lee.
Nice. Sounds cool.
It's Naruto Man. It's where they catch them all.
It's like Anpanman.
As for sort of my final thoughts, I agree completely with what you guys have said so far. I think for me, the main thing is I'm glad that I finally crossed the threshold of just being aware of Berserk as a thing into actually experiencing it. I expected a lot of the time to just kind of sit through it and slog through it to a degree, but I'm glad that was not the case. I actually enjoyed it for what it was at all times. Could the things be different? Could pacing be different? Have they taken some time in other ways better? The depiction of some of the characters kind of not great, sure, but overall I think it holds up very well. There, of course, is a big old content warning with some of the things that we see and that exist also continuing in the manga from what I'm aware of course, so be aware of that. But absolutely worth my time, and I'm glad we did this.
Yeah, me too. If we do decide in the future to cover the 2016 show, like, I'll definitely watch it for that, or the movies, or anything really.
I think you guys have convinced me on the movies. I think I'm gonna have to sit down and watch them now.
They're definitely worth it. Like,
or at least the Memorial Edition if you want it to be cleaned up a little bit.
Okay. All right. Well, Will, as our subject matter expert, what are your sort of final thoughts on our Berserk discussion today?
Yeah, well, Berserk is definitely something that in a lot of ways can be very heavy. I know it's not always the thing that you want to get in the mood to watch. But I do think that there's truly nothing else quite like it. My introduction to Berserk as a whole was this 97 anime, and I think it still holds up extremely well. It really is kind of a sum of its all parts. The art, the music, I think the voice acting is excellent. Even for 90s dubs at the time, I still think it's a really fun dub to watch. A lot of it is kind of what we've discussed just in terms of, Miura has said in interviews before that Berserk at its core is kind of a human story, and he always tries to think about what the characters would do in these situations based on everything they've been through. Right. And I think a lot of that really does shine through Berserk as a whole, especially in this. We get to see a lot of what's happening underneath, as well as having a very compelling world that, to Austin's point, is always giving you a little bit of information and then expanding on it, and then more information that kind of is changing how you're looking at everything. Berserk it's just a lot, but I think in a great way. If anyone's ever interested, I think the manga is a very good way to go as well, to read it how you can. Yeah, the 90s anime I think is the best over the movies, honestly, but the movies do have a lot of their pros too, so kind of whichever way you tackle Berserk is a good way to do it.
I'm looking forward to the pull quote on the back of the Memorial box set where it just says, "Berserk, it's a lot," from SwooshXBear on YouTube.
It really is, and there really isn't anything like it, I don't think, in terms of even though it is kind of the granddaddy of dark fantasy, it's more than just that. Mm-hmm. It has so much heart in it alongside these fantastic designs and art with it too.
If you like those Dark Souls, if you like those Bloodborns, if you like those Elden Rings, like me, you will enjoy Berserk.
Pretty dark. All right, so let's go in reverse order. Will, what is your sort of one iconic scene from this series?
It's so hard to pick just one, and I know everyone's going to say the same exact thing. I kind of want to pick two, but I'll pick one to save y'all, and if nobody mentions my second one, I'll bring it up briefly, maybe. Okay. I'm gonna probably just say the Bonfire of Dreams is my favorite scene, when Guts is really finally having someone to speak his thoughts about, when he's talking to Kauska about what it means to follow a dream and how he has to find that for himself, and a lot of those major themes of Golden Age about purpose. And though with the Guts theme playing too, I think it's really just a big culmination of everything that's kind of happening thematically in this show, kind of especially coming to a head. And it's great. It's very iconic for a reason, and I think that's probably my favorite.
As for myself, I'm glad you mentioned the Guts theme, because that's another episode rather. The point where we first see him join up with Griffith, and he and Griffith have the fight, and he loses. It plays the song Guts from the OST the first time we hear it, and that song is very emotional, and that song playing in the background, even though the scene is just kind of set up, it made me realize that I'm watching something special. That was the point where I metaphorically leaned forward in my chair. I went from seeing a 90s anime, whatever, by the Pokemon Studio, to holy shit, this is going to be a thing that I'm going to love.
Yes.
And that will stick with me. As simple as that scene was, because of the Hirasawa music, really made that pop.
Yeah, the music for me as well definitely made this a memorable show. And I feel that way about music in general. If you have a good soundtrack, it takes something that has a good plot and makes it it goes from good to great, basically. And like I've said that a lot about video games. Like I don't listen to a lot of like modern video game soundtracks because a lot of it is like atmospheric. No, I want something that's going to be an earworm that I'm going to be like thinking about like while I sleep, basically. And that
Exactly.
Berserk literally did that. Like Guts theme played in my head like rent free for like a week after finishing this show.
I think a domestic U.S. based vinyl press company did release the Berserk soundtrack on vinyl not too long ago.
I think that was Mondo. That sounds familiar.
I want to say Mondo, but for some reason I don't. I'm really not sure. Maybe.
I know what you're talking about, though. That definitely does sound familiar.
Yeah.
Well, what was your number one scene, Ryan? Is that was one of those endings with the gut themes?
No, actually, my number one scene was definitely the Zod fight, just because I really liked the progression of it. Like, even though I knew exactly what was happening because I've been here before, they did a really good job of just showing Band of the Hawk are straight up against something that they've never faced before, and they're probably not coming out of this one okay. And I forgot how almost not okay like that was. Like they lost. Like they only got away because Zod let them get away. Like it was just it's one of my favorites. Like anytime I'm watching anything with it, just Zod is one of my favorite characters in general, and that fight was just very well done, especially in terms of 90s animation.
Interesting. Austin, what is your number one scene?
Well, unfortunately, I think the scene that will be severed into my mind forever is, of course, the scene where emaciated Griffith, at the cusp of the eclipse, is holding the Bailet, like, in his hand. And it's that beautiful sort of mid-shot where he's, like, kneeling in the pool of water. You see the eclipse about to begin in behind him, and he's just holding it. I think that particular image is just so striking, just like the composition, the desperation, the intensity of the moment, the feeling of dread that is so palpable. I think that particular scene will be something that I think of often whenever I think of Berserk. I'm not going to do 2 because nobody else did 2, but I'm just going to say that one. That's the one that I will think of whenever I think of Berserk.
By the way, I'll try to find this so we can include it in the show notes, but there is a meme of that with the screaming cowboy for when the Bailet like wakes up and just screams.
It's kind of
really
like that.
Funny edit of that.
It is kind of like that.
Yeah.
Well, you don't get to, but I'm going to go ahead and give Will a second if he wants to take it, because he's our special guest and we love him.
Ooh. So my second favorite one is very similar to Bonfire, where it's when Griffith is talking to Charlotte about what it means to have a dream from his perspective, and how he sees no man as his equal if he doesn't have any sort of ambition or anything worth fighting for. And really Guts and Casca eavesdropping on that scene is what kind of opens up Guts' eyes to everything. Yet again, another scene that plays I'm pretty sure it plays the Guts theme in that during that scene too.
It's so good. It really is.
It is. When you hear those first notes, like this is important, and like it really adds to that embellishment in a very positive way. But I love seeing Griffith's take on that whole theme, and then Bonfire, you get to see Guts' response, basically.
It's a bit,
and they never really have that conversation with each other.
Right,
it's always
exactly.
them talking to someone else about it.
This
Good thing to point out. It is a conversation, but not really a conversation.
I don't know if this was before. I don't know. I might be getting my timelines mixed up. But Guts' theme reminds me a little bit of Laura Palmer's theme from Twin Peaks. A little bit.
Oh yeah, I can see that for sure.
No,
Yeah.
just
I've
a little bit.
actually not seen Twin Peaks, so I can't speak to that.
It is way more influential on anime than you would think.
On anime?
I'm gonna.
Yes.
It's Link's Awakening. Was it Link's Awakening based on Twin Peaks, pretty much?
I don't know, but like
Lightly.
every
it has slight inspiration.
most anime creators that made a splash in the 90s for being esoteric in any way would probably have seen Twin Peaks, and they pulled from it. And it was super popular. Like they did like coffee commercials and everything. Like it hit in Japan really hard.
Well, knowing Minura, where he pulls from pretty much everything he absorbs, it seems like. I'm sure he is a big fan.
All right, well, that's going to wrap us up on our discussion of Berserk in 1997. We are Third Impact Anime. Particularly, we are the God Hand of anime podcast, if you will. You can find our website at thirdimpactanime.com, where we have collated our podcast feed. We've got a few written articles still up there kicking around. We've got links to our social media, all there, as well as our Patreon. Go ahead and click that if you like this episode. Go over our Patreon and kick a few bucks our way. Or if you want to give us, or kick a lot more than a few bucks, we're more than happy to take that as well. I want to say, Austin, didn't you just retool it a bit to give our producers, trying to get our producers to get some things in?
Yeah, so our top tier right now is it's still just a simple $5. It's nothing super fancy, but one of the perks of being a $5 patron is that you have the ability to submit us episode requests, and if we decide to do them, you will get executive producer credit on that by name. And I did want to thank Drew H. for being a recent premium patron on that particular tier. He's our wonderful friend Drew that we had on for our review of Goodbye Partner, the Lupin the Third episode. He's a co-host of the Sidebirds and Cigarettes podcast. So Drew, I know we've already talked about this, but we are going to be working on your request in the near future.
Yeah, I think he was, what was it, movies, OVAs?
Well, I was going to keep it under wraps, but if you just want to go ahead and out and say it, that's fine.
We can keep it. That's a smart idea. And I think joining Drew isn't our other one, isn't Abby, our little Discord troll?
Abby P. Yep, she's another patron at the producer tier, and we're working on her request as well.
Wasn't her request initially Beastars 2?
Well, that's the thing, right?
Oh, that's right, it was.
It was going to be, but then at the time that she submitted the idea, it was like we were already working on it, so I didn't think that was fair.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you liked our discussion today and want us to talk about your favorite thing, go ahead and kick us $5, and we might or may not, depending.
We have the right to refuse.
We'll try our best, though, unless you... Pretty much the bar is like, don't ask us to review porn.
Either way, we will still love you, no matter if you submit us $5 or $1.
You say that after we review a series with a lot of graphic sexual content.
Hey,
if I can get these guys to come on here and talk about Berserk with me, then the sky's the limit.
All right. Everything you can find on thirdimpactanime.com. As far as our individual links, Ryan, where can people find you on the internet?
People can find me on Twitter at MidshelfRyan. If you want to check our basically defunct YouTube channel out, that's Midshelf Gaming. And you can find me in real life. I'm going to be at Animazement with some of these guys in May.
Yeah, we will be at Animazement for sure, as we usually are. Austin, where can people find you on the internet?
For the meantime, you can still find me over on Twitter at BebopShock. You can also find me over on Mastodon at the same thing. And you can hit me up on Letterboxd. It's my favorite social media. It's the best one.
And Will, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, so most prominently you can find me on YouTube as SwooshXBear. I, of course, have been doing my most recent review of Resident Evil 4, as we're going through kind of every Resident Evil game to review, so it's been a great time. If that tickles your fancy, come check me out there. You can also find me on Twitter, as well as Letterboxd at the same, SwooshXBear. And more frequently, you can see me on the Third Impact Anime Community Discord.
Yep.
It's a great place.
I was going to say, that's pretty much the only place to find me on the internet anymore. Go ahead and join that aforementioned Discord. Again, linked at thirdimpactanime.com. And, of course, like every podcast, let's go ahead and beg our audience to go subscribe to us on iTunes, give us reviews, rate and review. I don't think that actually means anything anymore, if we're being honest, but we are podcasts, so we have to ask.
We have
We're contractually obligated. Yeah,
you sign that away when you create a Podbean.
Exactly. But, we always would like more people to listen to our podcast and join the Discord, so feel free to share with your friends. If you know anybody that maybe who is just getting into anime and manga, and instead of going to Reddit, is asking their friend, what should I watch? And they say Berserk, but oh wait, you should also listen to this episode of the Third Impact Anime podcast after you watch Berserk and have your mind blown. we would love to get more people into the fold. All right, guys. Well, it was a great discussion. I'm glad to have you guys on, and we will catch you next time.